The sitting is resumed. Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise to contribute to this debate on this housing resolution dealing with the vesting of land in the NHC. And as outlined by the leader of government business, we understand that this land is for the purpose of housing development. And, well, I'm certain that many Barbadians would be happy to hear that this government is finally looking to address their housing needs, as they had a lot of hope that they would get housing out of this government. But so far, for the 6 years in which they have been in office, that hope has all fallen in vain. And housing for this government seems to be a hopeless project. And I also have to, Mr. President, in contributing to this debate, recognize the conversation which is currently going on in the country about the way how the government is utilizing the land at its disposal and the blatant disregard it seems to have for agriculture. And not just agriculture, but all productive sectors in Barbados, including fisheries as well, but this is a land-based project, so we won't go there. But there's no fish on this land. Okay, thanks for the clarification. But Barbadians are concerned as to the direction in which this government is going when it comes to looking out for the things, the bread and butter issues, we can say, of Barbadians. We recognize that now, and I'm someone from the country who has been accustomed to getting sweet potatoes by the rod for $25 and things like that. We know now that you can hardly find an agricultural field in this country where you can go and get sweet potatoes $25 a rod. Right now, the price is some places $4 a pound, and they actually projected it to go to $6 a pound, which says to us that there is a very real concern about our food security in this country and the country being able to satisfy that. I know that the Senator Cummings, in her introduction, she glanced over the role of the Bulling Agricultural Station, which once sat on this parcel of land which we are addressing today, and the vital work in which it did in terms of contributing to agriculture within this country. It more so focused on horticulture in terms of flowering plants, and which could be a thriving industry for Barbados. And the tissue culture plant was also there as well. A thriving industry for Barbados, because we do know and we do boast every year going to the flower show in London and winning, coming back with either gold or silver gilt, but getting very high achievements for that. And it does go to show that there is an industry in Barbados for cut flowers, and there is an industry for the exportation of these cut flowers as well, and these horticultural products from Barbados. And you need to ask the government the question, really, is agriculture a part of their priorities for the government of Barbados, the Barbados Labour Party government, and being able to supply the needs of the people of Barbados? You have the Barbados Agricultural Society hopping mad with regard to this current vesting and the fact that it is taking away arable land out of agriculture and putting it at the disposal of housing. But we, as Senator Walters would have mentioned this morning, you are not hearing from the government where they are taking arable land out of agriculture and placing it at the disposal for housing, What are they doing to show up agriculture in Barbados with the rest of the land that is available to make sure that agriculture thrives in Barbados? They would have come with a project for young farmers. Practically everything which this government has touched with regard to agriculture has failed dismally. A project, you may want to jump on a point of order for that, but it is the truth. It is the truth. And you may not feel comfortable over there when you have to say these truths, but they are the truth. And the fact is that these are things that you will have to deal with when you come to go out there to canvass the constituents. You have to answer to those questions, because all now Barbadians are not happy with the way this government has treated agriculture in Barbados. The fact that there is no food security, no real plan to show up the food security. Every single agricultural project that this government has put its hands on has failed. Every single project has failed. And we go to poultry. Agriculture could be utilized on these very same lands. They are responsible to the death of the poultry industry in Barbados. Starting back, was it in 2022, with the project that you had in terms of trying to stabilize prices in the supermarket, the price compact. Starting with that project, this government has offered very little, well, I can't even say very little assistance, because that would be complimentary to them. They have offered no assistance, no real tangible assistance to small farmers in Barbados, especially poultry farmers. And as a result of that, many of them have decided that they we're calling it quits in terms of production in Barbados. Instead, they offered the assistance to Roberts Manufacturing in terms of the $6 million which was offered to reduce the cost of the feed, but the cost of the feed still went up. And you would have thought that a caring government would have offered the assistance directly to the farmers, because the farmers were complaining about not having the cash flow in order to sustain their production. And that's why to this day, you are not finding chickens in supermarkets in Barbados. You have to hunt. Caterers are having that difficulty finding chickens on the shelf, in the freezers, the fridge in supermarkets. You are hearing about eggs having to be imported into this country. And the quality of those eggs are oftentimes questionable.
Mr. President,
What do you raise?
I read a point of order because I believe that the Honourable Senator is misleading the House when he suggests that this government is responsible, as he's indicated, for the death of the poultry industry. Mr. President, there has been much debate on this matter. And even the Barbados Agricultural Association has indicated that there are a number of different reasons for what we are seeing now within the poultry industry. One of them is relating to, again, climate change and the heat that has been experienced and the death because of that heat of a number of the stock. Mr. President, the government is not responsible, Mr. President, for the lack of eggs on the market. In fact, Mr. President, you will recall,
if you say no and you go there, the farmers will take you to task on it. So if you want to raise on a point of order for that, do so now.
Please suggest it, Chair. I do not intend to raise it anytime soon from this chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I go back to my point. This government has contributed to the decline in agricultural production in this country. You don't have to take my word for it. You can go to the Central Bank report if they dare report on it. In Barbados, we were self-sufficient in the supply of poultry. We were self-sufficient in the supply of poultry. That is not the case today, because you cannot go to the farmers within your community and get the poultry from them. Because I can tell you from my perspective, never was in the habit of buying poultry from the supermarket. I live in the country, and I bought the poultry from the persons around me. I was never in the habit of buying eggs from in the supermarket. I live in the country, and I buy the eggs from the persons around me. But that is not the case today because of the way how this Barbados Labour Party government has allowed the agricultural sector in Barbados to decline, especially when it comes to small farmers, because they know that they have a track record of only supporting the big business because the $6 million went to Roberts.
Mr. President, I also
You are
raised,
bold.
again, on a point of order, again, the Honourable Senator is misleading the House. Mr. President, the government recently, very recently, and it was very much publicized, just announced, particularly to support small farmers, $2 million, Mr. President,
$2 million.
was set aside, and this is just one aspect. Mr. President,
Senator Honourable, you can't speak from your seat. Senator Moroni has the floor.
No, they have.
Please continue, Senator Moroni.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, because I'm responding again to the comment that the government, particularly in relation to poultry and small farmers, has not supported. And I am giving Mr. President facts. $2 million is set aside with infrastructure expansion, again, to help the poultry sector specifically, such that the president of the Poultry Association actually lauded the initiative, noting again that the government was investing in a way in infrastructure for the expansion of the sector for the long term, not just by giving farmers money, but for building out infrastructure to small farmers, Mr. President. Small farmers. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Please continue, Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Please note as well, though, that we have given everyone latitude, and very generous with latitude, the resolution, even though it is what the land was built as agricultural station, is not an agricultural debate in its totality. So you must still want to be guided by that.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I will wrap up quick soon with regard to the point about agriculture, because it is agricultural land which we are speaking about. And I don't know if anybody in the farming industry is applauding the $2 million which the Senator just spoke about, but I'm talking about the fact in Barbados. You had no chickens on the shelves of supermarkets in Barbados a few weeks ago. Deny that as a fact. That has to do with the fact that the agricultural industry in Barbados was not supported. When this government entered into the price compact, it hurt the small farmers in Barbados, and many of them had to shut up shop or scale back. Yes, there may be a number of other issues, but are these issues unique to Barbados? Why is it that you are not hearing about these complaints in other Caribbean countries? Because I am certain that the industries are still thriving in other areas, but this government has done nothing, even though they have the facts.
Mr. President, I rise on another point of order. Thank you very much.
What's the point of order?
Again, the Honourable Senator is misleading the House. There is right across the Caribbean, and if he would perhaps do some further research and reading, he would know that CARICOM, the Honourable Member would know that the agricultural sector and its decline across the region was of such a serious concern that there was actually a specific agreement that CARICOM signed having to do with agriculture, and CARICOM ministers agreed to a program of 25 by 25 in order to raise production across the region by 2025, Mr. President. The seriousness of it, not only in Barbados, not only in St. Lucia and Grenada, but in Trinidad and even Guyana, Mr. President, right across the region.
Thank you, Senator. Please continue, Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. The fact is, right, she cannot get up on a point of the senator cannot get up on a point of order
and just for the benefit of all,
Mr. President,
of all honourable senators, according to the rules, first of all, we're all honourable senators here. A senator may be called by name, but as they say in old Barbados terms, you have to put a handle to it. So you can say Senator King, Senator Graves, you can say Honourable Senator, but there's no he, she, or anything of this sort. I know we're all friendly and so on, and we can get carried away, but just in terms of the honoured tradition of the Senate. And if you address the chair, you want to get carried away with he, she, or what they say. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your guidance, Mr. President. Mr. President, I will continue with my contribution. But the facts are there, and Barbadians recognize it, that the Barbados Labour Party administration has done little or nothing at all to assist the agricultural sector in Barbados, and that is why we are in this state today. When the farmers were calling out because of the issues of the high feed, they gave the subvention to Roberts Manufacturing. The cost of the feed.
Mr. President, I rise on a point of order.
What's the point of order?
The point of order, Mr. President, is that the honourable member is misleading the House. The government did not give any sum of money to Roberts directly. Roberts had a line of credit that was supporting the small farmers to allow them to procure feed from Pinnacle Foods. And that is the basis on which the subvention was given, if the funds were given to Roberts on behalf of small farmers.
Thank you for that clarification. Continue, Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, but that clarification is not accurate, because I know that there were reports from the Minister of Agriculture about $6 million going to Roberts Manufacturing in a subsidy. It was said by this government. But I will continue, Mr. President. They have done very little to help, and as a result of that, a number of small farmers have gone out of business, and that is one of the main reasons for the crisis. They've cut down on their production. And Mr. President, if I can be challenged that we had no chickens in the supermarket over the last few weeks, I will sit down and take my seat and accept their word. But they cannot get up and deny that fact, Mr. President. I continue. So this resolution, the government needs to let the people of Barbados know what is their true intention with agriculture in this country and the food security. The senator spoke about climate change. We also have to take that into consideration, but we still have to produce in this country. I have to make land accessible to farmers so that they are able to produce. So that is the main point. And in returning to this resolution, I would like to ask the question. Senator Cummins, in her introduction, she spoke about the name of the place, that the housing project, which would be Floralis Gardens, I believe it was. But she did not specify the type of housing project and also the income level at which people will qualify for this project. I think that would be good to share with the people of Barbados the price range for this housing project, because we may come here today thinking that we are dealing with housing that will benefit a wide cross-section of Barbadians. But unless we know the price range for these houses when they're developed, that would help us to identify which market in Barbados we are dealing with this housing project. So I asked that question to Senator Cummins, and hopefully she'll be able to provide that response when she is doing her wrap-up today. And also to go back to some of the things that Senator Blackman would have said. Now, we also have Auditor General's report too that are not too glowingly about the Barbados Labour Party administration, Mr. President. But just to clarify some things with the one that he read, Senator Blackman read, yes, he did speak about $28 million, but that $28 million covered two projects. And out of those two projects, over 156 houses were developed. But I would like to draw this House's attention to a more recent Auditor General's report of 2024 with regard to the steel frame houses. So if Senator Blackman wants to drop Auditor General's report, let us drop one here too, with a more recent vintage that this administration should ask themselves about and explain to the people of Barbados. But I will go through it and read just the same way the summary of the findings. Now, we had, after Storm Elsa, which Senator Walters mentioned, this government came with this brilliant idea of doing these steel frame houses, and the argument was that it would be able to help to quickly build out those houses which were damaged and get people back into those houses within 6 months. And they could not rely on the artisans here in Barbados because they said that that process would take too long. So they then went and they spent money in importing these steel frame houses into Barbados, which were supposed to house the persons who lost their houses in Elsa in 6 months. But you know, Mr. President, that only a couple of weeks ago, that some persons whose houses were damaged from Hurricane Elsa, which was in 2021, only just moved back into their homes. So that government needs to answer for that as well. Only just moved back into their homes. And there was but I want to go to the Auditor General's report, Mr. President, a special audit report on the acquisition and construction of steel frame housing units by the Ministry of Housing and Lands and Maintenance done not too long ago, Mr. President, the 26th of March, 2024. Let us talk about the current, the pain going through, that the people of Barbados are going through. The background to this, Mr. President, is that those houses were expected to fit 750 persons, but I will just read the summary of the findings. The audit revealed a number of issues which have prevented the successful completion of the project. They are outlined below. 1. The Ministry of Housing did not make all of the necessary building sites available in a timely manner that would have allowed for the prompt erection of the housing units. As at the 8th of February 2024, we started talking about something that started all the way back in 2021, when a site visit was made by the auditors, only 42 of the required 103 foundations were completed, and this has significantly impacted the completion of the project. And we are expected to believe that this government will be able to build 10,000 houses in the next couple of years with a track record like this. I continue, Mr. President. It was projected that the project would have resulted in 150 family persons affected by Hurricane Elsa in 2021 receiving housing solution as a result of the execution of the project by the 31st of December 2021. Over the course of the project, the number of family persons to receive housing units has decreased. And as at October 2023, only 23 of these housing units were slated to be assigned to those whose houses were destroyed. Only 23. Only 23. The cost of the project has risen significantly. This was due in part to an underestimation of the installation costs of the units and a rising prices as stated by the entity. And according to the Ministry of Housing, inflation on construction materials for the foundation and the sites. The original estimated cost of the overall project was $29.08 million. However, based on the review of the information received from the Ministry of Housing, the audit projected that the total cost for the project is now approximately $52.72 million. Which is an increase, or an overrun as they would call it, of $23.64 million. How many houses they said were delivered? Only 23. And Senator Blackman will try to make a mountain out of a molehill of 2 projects which had 156 homes. But let us continue, Mr. President. There may be more.
I trust you don't spend your time reading the rest of the report. You need to summarize portions of it.
Well, the most important part of it was done, Mr. President. But the fact is, this Barbados Labour Party government does not have a track record to stand on in housing. And don't care however you try to slice or dice it, the BLP record on housing has been dismal. And when you ask them for an update on the turnover of the NHG houses for persons that lived in them for the 20 years, they cannot give information on that either. If they want to talk about a record in housing, we need to bring all the facts to the table. So we need to let the people of Barbados know about the whole project. And why has this Barbados Labour Party administration prevented the Public Accounts Committee from being able to investigate that whole project?
Mr. President, I rise on a point of order. The honourable member is grossly misleading the House. As I recall it, the Public Accounts Committee has not met since the honourable member has become a member of the Senate, and therefore on what basis he is attempting to speak about the rationale for the Public Accounts Committee, it is beyond me. But secondly, Mr. President, the Public Accounts Committee has met and it has agreed that it will consider the report of Hope, which has not to date been submitted. So you can't consider a report that has not been submitted or laid in Parliament. The honourable member is misleading the House, and it is not without some deliberation.
Senator Cummins, please press on, Senator. You have 2 minutes to wind up, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The fact is, Mr. President, we need to examine those records of who. And if this Barbados Labour Party administration does not have a leg to stand on when it comes to housing in Barbados, your record is dismal and it is poor. It is poor, and you cannot expect the people of Barbados to believe that the same Barbados Labour Party administration, who was only able to deliver how many houses so far, 106?
70 a year.
70 a year for the time that they have been able miraculously be able to deliver 10,000 houses. Mr. President, I am saying that the people of Barbados need more information from this administration. They do not have a leg to stand on when it comes to housing. We notice that they are not interested in agriculture in this country, and I am telling you, the Democratic Labour Party did a far better job in housing the people of Barbados in the time when it was in office with very scarce resources. But every single time the Prime Minister visits Barbados, she comes with a new loan. But yet still, they cannot deliver housing solutions for the people of Barbados. And I will repeat the question: what is the cost of the housing project which will go on this site, so that the people of Barbados will not think that, yes, housing coming from me, but it may be at a totally different level of persons. So I ask that question, and I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Worrell. And Speaker, Senator Morris.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me, first of all,
I sit down where your legs.
let me first of all, sir,
Always ready.
wish you and all members of this honorable chamber a very, I don't like using the word independence, but I will. A very happy independence and a Republic Day as well. I don't like using the word independence, sir, because you know it was used in a poem for England to join the European Union. But happy Republic Day, sir. The other thing I want to begin by saying that it seems as though all of a sudden the members of the Democratic Labour Party have washed their sins in the blood of the Lamb, and they are now holier than thou and anybody else in this country to speak on any matter. Because, sir, let me emphasize that I heard a lot this morning about using independent analysis, about using the facts. But yet when there are independent analyses on this country by independent analysts, people like the IMF, people like Fish, people like Standard & Poor, people like all the other ratings, yet it is questioned, but we must accept what the members of the Democratic Labour Party say about this economy, and at the same time, reject what the independent analysts say. And that is what we are being told in here today.
You say you're handling all the money?
The other thing, sir, I want to talk about is food security and agriculture and housing. All of a sudden, food security is a major issue in this country in relation to land. Well, sir, you know, I'm a student of history, so I go back. Food security was not threatened way back in 1961, when the Prime Minister said he would like to look from St. Philip to St. Lucie without seeing a cane blade. I understood it then. I understood it. But let me say this. Westmoreland Plantation, that was arable land. Okay? Oysters and all those places were arable land too. That was arable land too. But what did we have, sir? That Westmoreland Plantation, Sandy Lane, Molyneux, Lascelles, all of them were cut up and sold to expatriates. That is how we end up with the West Coast. Not the Barbados Labour Party. Not the Barbados Labour Party. That is how we end up with the West Coast. Owned by Oliver Messels. Owned by Ronald Tree. Owned by, I can't remember his name, but his name is Lascelles. As a matter of fact, the agricultural land was taken up and a road was built dedicated to Lascelles. Now, do not believe that I'm talking about the Lascelles Road. I'm not talking about that at all. That was Lascelles Plantation. What I'm talking about is that road that named after Lascelles when you coming up through Seaview, and you're going up just at the left. There's a road called Lascelles Road. So all of this was cutting up. And the land was given away because they were able, they bought the land on the West Coast at concessionary prices. I have no problem with that, sir. Because I believe in the mantra of Owen Arthur, former Prime Minister Owen Arthur, that land must be used for its best economic advantage. And when we are talking about all of this agriculture, sir, agriculture was on the decline now for years. It was on the decline for years. And truthfully, many of our young people are not going into agriculture. And I can understand why. Because there's a stigma attached to agriculture. In addition, governments in other countries are subsidizing agriculture. So it means, therefore, that we may find it very difficult to compete. We may find it very difficult to compete. So all of these things have been taken. All of a sudden, we have a situation where they have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb, and now they pretend to be so innocent. When agriculture was started to decline long ago, not just now, long ago. So all this talk, sir, about making us feel that the Barbados Labour Party has now committed an unrepentable sin in terms of agriculture, sir, all that talk has come to nothing. Because even if we had to accept one industry, but under the previous Democratic Labour Party, sir, every industry was in decline. Every one. So much so that we were on bended knees, just waiting to be given a little knock to be pushed over. Maybe, sir, the attitude of the Democratic Labour Party to housing is reflected in the dumps. The dumps, sir. There was a dump at Rock Hall, St. Philip, if you remember. There was a dump at Lonesome Hill, St. Peter. I don't think many members know where Lonesome Hill is.
You speak up there, right?
Oh. It maybe is reflected in that. Because a number of persons moved to Rock Hall, St. Philip on a dump to live. And when the Barbados Labour Party government wanted to remove, so I like pointing, so I make sure I pull back my sleeves, so you all can see my fingers. But when the Democratic Labour Party, when the Barbados Labour Party wanted to move these people, the people were told, don't move, don't touch them. You all don't remember these things, but I remember. So it is okay for people to live on a dump, but it's not okay for them now to live on good land. So the arable land. Let me tell you something about arable land, sir. I always look at the Cuban Revolution, and there's one thing that I admire about it, that previous to the revolution, the best land in Cuba was owned by foreigners, by expatriates. And Fidel Castro decided that the best lands in Cuba must be owned by Cubans. And that is why he passed the agrarian law, in which 27 hectares of land was given to each Cuban family. It was the best of the land. Whether for housing or agriculture, the point is, it was given to the best of land, the best of land. Ambition, sir. I heard about ambition. And the ambition, let me get the words right. Ambition is flawed. How does an ambition get flawed? You see, we are attempting to fool people in this country, but okay, sir. We're attempting to twist the truth. How does an ambition get flawed? When I was going to school, sir, they told me if I wanted to get good marks, aim for an A. Aim for an A. That's what I aim for. But in response to that talk about ambition being flawed, my response is, Nil Odakiai, Nil Prayan. You know what that means, sir? It means nothing ventured, nothing gained. It would pay us better to look at these things, sir. Housing. There was a housing minister in Barbados, the Minister of Housing in Barbados. And if you look at the reports, there was a view expressed that some of the government's money was used to build the private houses of the minister. And they challenge anybody in here or in this country to deny that. Because during the day at school, I used to be interrupted with the saw and the hammer in the backyard of Melbourne. So don't come now and tell me that your hands are so clean. And that was one of the scandals all over the place. And the Minister of Government was also a house seller, sold house, built them and sold them. And I remember standing up in the schoolyard one evening. This is what I saw, sir. And one man was not paid. And he was told to leave the premises, having worked for a whole week. And the man stood up in the ministry, in the yard, and he cried because he had nothing to take home to his family. So don't come in here, sir, and believe that everything was so well and good under you. Remember Haynesville, sir? That means the people at Haynesville were promised the land, were promised their units, that they were in bad conditions. And even so, even though they were promised, the deeds were not drawn up for them. So speak to your record, but don't come now to make it seem as though that your hands are so clean. We talk about land and housing. Do you remember, sir, the $500 million that was supposed to be spent on, was Andrew, the one at St. Joseph? Is Andrews? The Andrews factory. Do we remember the $500 million that was supposed to be spent on that? Where is Andrews? Where is the factory? Where is the thing to make the tambourine? inserted all that. Where is that money? And we are talking River Tamarins that they were supposed to convert into animal feed. So if you come in here, sir, and you want to talk facts, let us talk facts. But don't tell me that your hands are low, so you have washed your robes in the blood of the Lamb, and you're so innocent. Not you, sir. I'm talking to persons who are talking about these things. Mr. President, sir, I wish that when it comes to these things, that we can deal with all of these matters dispassionately. I may have been impassioned myself because of the route that I heard going down here by the honourable senators from the opposition. And you know how it is with figures, sir. We know with these things. But when you take up on truth and make them facts, it reminds me of Jesus before Pilate. What is truth? And the reason why I spoke on this issue and I spoke like this, because when those of us who know the truth do not speak up, dire consequences follow. And if we do not speak up, sir, there could be a crucifixion without a resurrection. And I'm saying, sir, that it is okay to want to make a point, but don't bring your own facts or bring your own opinion and pass them on as facts. Otherwise, we're not only misleading the House, we're misleading the country as a whole. I believe, sir, that I think I'll speak on this later in the day, the other point, but we must understand, we must really ask and look at our housing policy, though. We must look at it. Because we must ask ourselves, if our young people really want to invest in housing? Because many of our young people these days, I don't want to say they're not committed to a country or our country, but our young people, and I taught, sir, for 30-odd years, and I listened to them. They're not, some of them said they're not really interested in buying a house. And I mentioned the grandchildren, they'd be like coming up later. Because they want to up and go wherever they see a job. Wherever they see a job. So we have to, first in our mind, if we want to look at housing, first, who do we want the houses for? And what type? I've heard all sorts of things here this morning. What type? And for whom? And I believe, sir, that in my short life on this earth, I've seen things come and go. I've seen life at its best, and I've seen it at its worst. But however I see that life, I always commit myself, one, to speak truthfully to people, but at the same time, sir, I always commit myself to ensuring that that we have a better life for our people. I am much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Reverend Morris. Senator Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers.
Brown John. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just rise for a brief moment to speak to this resolution. I do not think that there's anything to oppose in the resolution, but I think as we gather this today on the cusp of the 50th anniversary of our nation's independence and its third anniversary as a republic, this particular resolution gives us an opportunity to do some introspection in terms of what are our goals as a people in this instance where housing is concerned. So I left this island in 1976 and returned in 1987 and has been here ever since. And for as long as I can remember, administration after administration has been discussing housing. When it wasn't hardwood, it was honeybee, it was all kinds of solutions. We have steel framed, everything. And today's discussion has been reflective of that. I do agree with Senator Walters when he said this is not a BRD scenario. And I would hope that it wouldn't be a BRD scenario, but in listening to the discussion this morning, all we've heard is accusation of one administration after another, and who built what and how many they built. And at the end of the day, none have really come up with a meaningful solution. And it causes me to go back to something I would have said in this honorable chamber some time ago, sir, that we're too small a nation to be trying to turn around the ship every time an administration comes to power. We need to have a national plan, and I believe we need to have a national housing plan, the type of housing we will invest in, and administrations become elected to manage the plan. But we cannot be going one after the other. Every time an administration changes, we just decide, well, I like how these things look, let's do that, or I like this plan. Because in reality, later on today, we'll discuss the Barbados population policy, and this particular piece of legislation actually counters something in the Barbados population policy. Because in the Barbados population policy, I don't want to reveal too much about it because we're going to discuss it later, actually has as one of its solutions to control the population so that there's space, there's sufficient green space left. Now, let's look at the proposal here. We're proposing 10,000 homes in 5 years, as rightly we have not been told what type of homes they will be. But let us just assume that you're talking about building on and making sure people have access to a piece of the rock. The average small house spot is 3,000 square feet, roughly. If you put 10,000 homes on 3,000 square feet, that's 30 million square feet. An acre is about 40,000 square feet, so that's about 750 acres, which is just over 1 square mile. So in 5 years, you've taken up 1 square mile of 166. And it will not be one, it will be more than that. I believe that the time has come when we should look at a national policy. I've said it before, and we have to invest in high-rise buildings. We have the Grotto, that's a good example. I had the opportunity to visit them. I have seen London-born towers, even though that's not so much high-rise, but this is where we need to go. It may mean reorienting the mindset of our people in terms of what we call home. But the reality is that we have to look at where the country is going and what our development plan will be for the next 25 to 30 years. I've said we cannot keep making 3-year plans. And that seems to be, the whole discussion here today has been about 3-year plans. Somebody will get in and say the steel frame houses were not good enough, so we're going to do it something else. And before you know it, we've spent millions of dollars again on nothing. I think this gives us the opportunity on the eve of our independence to think seriously about what we are going to do for this country that we call home. What contribution we're going to make as the parliament of this country right now. And it certainly cannot be more of the same. It cannot be more of the same. Now, we've discussed houses here and we're building these houses, but when last, and this is just a question, when last has a real low-income house been built in Barbados? But we'll have to determine what is low income. But I know half of these houses that are being produced, there are a lot of people can't afford them. And there's a reason they cannot afford them. Because the price of land in Barbados skyrocketed in the late 90s, early 2000s. So even you could put the cheapest house on a piece of land in Barbados, it's going to be expensive. It's going to be out of the price range of some people, of the very low income people that we're trying to help. And so perhaps if we go into the more high-rise type buildings, it cuts out that cost of land that the individual person will have to pay. And perhaps will make things a little more affordable for the people who desperately need housing in this country. But we certainly cannot go on, because if we continue like this, we can leave this parliament and come back 25 years later and they'll still be arguing about the same thing. We are too small. Look, in the last few days I've had had reason to reflect on democracy and how good a system it is. Democracy is the fairest system, I believe, that we have for choosing our government. It's government of the people, for the people, by the people. But because a government is democratically elected, doesn't mean it's just. Doesn't mean its intentions will be virtuous. And all democracy means is that the government that is elected, the majority of people who voted think like that government. And it only means the majority of people who participated in the election. So you can actually have a democratically elected government that is a minority of the electorate. And that's why I've said, and I'm not speaking about our current situation, I'm just saying, going down the road, if we come together as a people, and this is the 58th anniversary of our election, of our independence, and say, look, we need to set a national plan for the next 30 to 50 years. Governments will change, administrations will change, but this is what it will be. This is what housing in Barbados will be like. This is what we're going to invest in. This is where the taxpayers' dollars are going to go. Such that an election just becomes an election for managers of the plan, rather than what we're seeing here. Because I've thoroughly enjoyed the discussion this morning, I must say. This was the first time I was actually upset that we were going for lunch. Because I was thoroughly enjoying the back and forth. But on a very serious note, as a nation, as a small nation, we have to think a little differently. And I don't think, as I've said, we don't have the type of politics that prevents us from doing this. We do not have that adversarial type politics. Everybody knows that an administration will be in today, and maybe a few years down the road another one will be in. We accept that. That's how it is. And so I believe that we can make that decision now as a people and say this is where we want to go. And it will be a holistic approach. So we're talking housing now, but it will deal with agriculture, it will deal with all the other things that we have to deal with. But what will happen is that we will know that going forward, when we elect a government, we don't have to worry about whether somebody at their whims and fancy went somewhere and saw a nice looking house and said, I should get some of them for Barbados. And then before you know it, we spend millions of dollars. They come and you can't get anybody to put them up because they didn't come with the instructions. And all those kinds of things. So we have to get, I believe, sir, we have to get very serious about ourselves. The world, though it's becoming smaller through technology, larger nations are becoming more isolationist. And we have to make sure that we build resilience here in our little pockets of the world. And the best way we can ensure that we build this resilience is that we have a national plan and we know what our goals are as a people. politics aside, so that when the storms of this world confront us, we are all singing on the same page because we know what our national goals are. And so, yes, I support the resolution because there's no reason not to. But I just implore us to do the type of reflection necessary at this time and endeavor to make the type of plans that will make Barbados better for all of us and for the future generations to come. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator the Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers. Senator King.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I shan't be long on this, but I think it is important, as was stated by Senator Rogers, all the politics aside, we begin to focus on what is the real problem. The real problem is housing, a lack of housing. This is a problem that not only Barbados faces, countries all over the world, large and small, have the same problem. But human beings from millennia have always wanted two major things: food and shelter. Food and shelter, two major things. And those two things will collide at some point in time, especially if you're living in small land spaces. Mr. President, I've listened carefully to members on the other side talk about food security, and in fact, in another place, I heard reference to us building concrete, putting concrete where we should be plowing lands. No, sir, I don't think any of us in this room are unaware of what has become almost folklore in Barbados, a Hurricane Janet, and the devastation that that would have caused to the housing stock at that particular point in time. A lot of chattel houses, wooden houses. If we're expecting now with climate change that you have to build sustainable and more resilient types of homes, it means, just to counter what was said, that you're going to have to use concrete. You can't go back to building how you used to build, especially when all of the science is saying that the hurricanes are going to be a lot more powerful than what we've experienced in the past. I mean, this is a simple, common sense thing that you need to do. If you're going to be building then and using more steel and more concrete, the cost of the building will naturally go up because the cost of producing those things have also gone up. And during 2021, 2022, you had a problem where shipping costs went up, which means that passing on to those persons buying steel, buying concrete, buying things was added monies. It would get reflected in what you termed as overruns and different things because the prices were inflated again. No, hold on. Because it's easy to come in here and just say, oh, the prices went up and there are overruns without putting it into context. No, I'm not saying that all of it is related to that, but you have to bring in all of the factors that will contribute to that when the statement is done. The Auditor General is not going to put in the book that says they went up because of these factors. He's going to state that it went up. But we have to be able, as was mentioned earlier, to speak fairly. I ain't gonna say truth because I've learned from my grandparents that in Barbados there are a number of people who are strangers to the truth. And so therefore I would deal more with fear rather than truth, because that gives some people a lot of problems. But we have to be fair when we are dealing with these issues. Mr. President, there is, if one takes a look across, just across the world in North America, a huge housing problem. in California, where you are finding more and more persons are living on the streets. In Barbados, for a number of years now, we've also had a problem where the young gentleman, the name doesn't catch me now, but he has been complaining for a number of times, Mr. Safri, that's the name, that more and more people are coming onto the streets. Now this speaks to another problem that oftentimes we don't talk about, and that is the abandonment of persons by their families and other things. Now, you can't blame any particular person for that, but it is a reality that we face, which means that government, in its quest to house as many of these persons who can't qualify for financing, it has to find lands from somewhere to do it. And if we are going to be honest, Barbados, in its heyday as a part of the British Empire, was one huge plantation. There was no land that you couldn't say wasn't agricultural land except the houses that the people who ran the plantations lived in. Everywhere else was agricultural land. So that as things change, and we are now the ones responsible for building homes, those people prior to that didn't have to build any homes for anyone. So they could have as much agricultural land as humanly possible. We don't have that luxury today. We have to be cognizant of the kind of messaging that we send out there when we are trying to score political points. Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with human beings. And if you either incite them or cause them to lose hope in their own existence, you're doing them a disservice. You're doing them a disservice. And if you're hoping to form the next government at some point in time, you have to begin to think about doing them a service and not a disservice. So while we can in here, none of us in here, none of us don't know what it is to be homeless. Not one. But there are people out there who know it and know it well. And in my days as a social worker, I can tell you, I walked the length and breadth of this country in places that I used to think that I was probably one of the poorest people in Barbados until I started that work. And I began to see with different eyes the dire straits that happens. And it's not any government's fault. It's just that in some instances, some persons, families from one generation to the next cannot help themselves. And the only recourse they have is for government to be helping them. I want to go back to something that was said in here earlier, especially in the 90s, because for me that was an interesting period in Barbados' development. Someone made the point that under this administration, a lot of houses were not built. I dare to tell you that under this administration, in that particular time, because I study it well, because I had to write songs about it, I had to study it, that there was a building boom where more people were in developing lands and building homes than we've ever seen, ever. Ever. And at that particular time, if you measured what government was doing in terms of building homes, the numbers should be down because there were a lot more players involved. But what the government did, they created something called Barbados Mortgage Finance. That even when it first, people calling me and asking me as a Calypsonian, come and get yourself sorted out. So if you have that, people have access to funding. There's no need for whole 10,000 people to run to government to get it because they got the financing to go and do it, do what they need to do. So when we begin to look and criticize about how many houses government was able to build or not able to build, you got to take all these other factors into consideration. Because if you got a building boom and you have access to financing, the body is saying now waiting on the government to build house. They can get the financing and build their own homes. What you should do is try to find out what are the figures to show how many people had mortgages from Barbados mortgage finance, how many homes were built, and put that into the equation. Then we will begin to talk something a little bit more factual about what we're dealing with, and not just conjecture, so that we, like I said before, that we can score some points. A lot of other factors you got to take into consideration. But at the end of the day, Mr. President, and I'm going to wrap up now, we have to get serious about what it is we want. Because I also heard from the other side that they have a problem with steel frame houses, which is the technology. And I always say to people, if there is technology available that is going to help you to build faster, to build stronger, to be resilient, why not do it? Because if you are anti-technology, let us all then take our cell phones, our devices, and all these things and throw them away and go back to typing or just writing. And I'm sure that nobody in this room is going to go back to that. So you have to open your minds to advance. I understand you're trying to make a point about small players going out of the market, but the demand is such that you need to supplement it with other technologies and other things that you can do. It will not put all of those people out of work, because at the same time, I'm sure that they learned how to construct and do all the things as part of working with it. So, again, sir, this is this government's attempt to solve a problem that we have had for generations. And I think is a step in the right direction. There is no lands, and I'm going to repeat this again for all those persons who may be listening. There are no lands in Barbados that at some point in time were not agricultural lands. But if we have to find a balance between providing housing and getting food. And that is why you would notice that a number of people are no longer just farming in terms of digging up the ground. People are getting things, hydroponics, aquaponics. They're using all sorts of different things to produce food, and produce a lot of food in urban spaces all across the globe. So again, using different technologies. One of the problems that the Democratic Labour Party has had for as long as I know myself, and I'm 60 years old now, is a myopic view of the world. And you cannot exist in the world with a myopic view. Because as things change, you have to be able to adapt and to make use of those things that will be beneficial to you, and to know what things you need to throw away. So, Mr. President, I again just want to reiterate my full support for this resolution, and I just hope that as we build out, this lot of talk about, oh, can't build 10,000 homes and all this stuff, I want to agree with the senator who made the point. In life, you aim high. And working again, I always used to tell students that, aim high. If you aim for the stars and you only reach the sky, all you have to do is to look back and see how far you came. And with those few words, I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator King. Senator Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I won't be very long. I know that this is the evening before celebrations this weekend, and I don't intend to detain anyone for a very long period. But I just wanted to make a few brief comments. I know it cannot be easy for any government to have to balance all of the demands for land, for housing, for commercial purposes, and for all the other reasons that we require expansion of land for recreational purposes, providing facilities for communities to congregate and so. So it's not an easy task, and any government has got to try to do their best in terms of balancing all of those demands. I raise that issue in the light of the fact that it always seems more than ever that when there's a demand for land, it is always the agricultural land which is used and utilized for that purpose. And of course, we know that once we take land out of agriculture, it is gone out forever. And what is worrying for me, and this is not something that I've not said in here before, but I raise it again because I think it is worth repeating, is that when we had in the 2013 Physical Development Plan, Mr. President, that report identified something like 45,000 acres of land which would have been available for agriculture. We had the 2017 Physical Development Plan, which was debated in this Honourable Senate not very long ago. In fact, it may have been this year or late last year. And that plan suggested that at the time only 28,000 acres of agricultural land could be identified. That is to say approximately 50% between that period, 2013 and the 2017 period, when these physical development plans were prepared, that you have lost in agriculture. Now, I don't know what the policy of the government is in terms of agriculture. I sort of heard some hints from, I believe it may have been Senator Morris, that agriculture is dead. I think that effectively he said agriculture is dead. And he also made the point that really land should be utilized in areas where it has the greatest economic value. Now, that may be, I don't know if that is a hint that the policy on agriculture of this government the present administration is changing. But I also note, of course, that government has invested itself.
I raise a point of order, and I hope that the record of the Senate would make it clear. But certainly, I did not hear Senator Morris indicate that agriculture was dead, or make any indication in his contribution to this honourable chamber that would suggest any indication in his mind that agriculture was dead. So I am unclear, I'm unclear, Mr. President.
But Senator Morris is present. Perhaps he may care to clarify. He has not objected.
Sir, I did say that agriculture was on the decline, and it has been so for years.
An entirely different statement. It's inflammatory.
Please continue, Senator Nurse.
Well, Look, I am not going to prolong the debate on it, but the point is that he did not sound very good tidings about agriculture. Let me put it that way, if that satisfies everybody. So, Mr. President, it is not. It is not to say that everything is going good in agriculture. We heard when this government took up the administration in 2018, we heard about medical marijuana. We thought that that was going to be the great alternative and the big area that will carry agriculture forward. That now seems to be, perhaps I shouldn't say it dead again, but you're not hearing anything about that. And it'll be interested to know what is happening.
Mr. President, I rise on a point of, or perhaps a point of elucidation. I would urge the Honourable Senator to reflect that only 2 weeks ago, Barbados hosted one of the biggest medicinal marijuana conference in the region. Actually, just today, the CEO of the medicinal marijuana agency was actually awarded as one of the chief persons then being able to push for the growth. In fact, again, the record will show that Barbados has issued a number of licenses under that regime for medicinal cannabis as well. We note, Mr. President, there are problems with banking, but in fact, the sector, as I said, has issued a number of licenses. There are people operating under those licenses. And again, 2 weeks ago, major conference in Barbados. So to suggest that nothing is being heard about the industry, again, is seeking to mislead the chamber. Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, it's certainly good to hear that we are having conferences and that licenses are being issued. Not sure, though, that the production is actually going on the ground. And that is really where we will know that this particular project, this initiative is taking root. That is when we will be convinced in that area. But I move on, Mr. President. What I am concerned about is the continual use of the agricultural land for these other purposes like housing and so on. I just had a look, Mr. President, at the order papers that we have had just for this year, not talking about all the others. But, you know, we had this one, we had resolution vesting of NHC land in holders, which we're now discussing. Resolution reacquisition of land at Trents. Resolution revesting of land at Pilgrim Place in Christchurch. Resolution revesting of land at Castle Grant Plantation in St. Joseph. Resolution pertaining to the compulsory acquisition of land at Work Hall in St. Philip. And we go on and we go on. And the point is that these were all lands that were at some point in agriculture. So the process is going on, and my concern is, can we get a policy from government about what are the serious plans for agriculture? Government only earlier this year, I believe it was, began the process of divesting itself of the sugar industry assets. Another indication that perhaps governments main thrust is not going to be in agriculture. And we have to look at all of that in the context of the fact that food security, and we have seen within recent times the issues of food security. When we have to depend on importation of all our food from whether it be this region, whether it be farther afield, we have seen the impacts which it can have in terms of our food security issues. And therefore, I would like to hear articulated at some point a serious policy on where we are going, if we are going anywhere, or if we are giving up on agriculture. And if so, what alternatives are we looking at? I know that as you drive along the country within recent times, you see a lot of these alternative energy systems springing up on various agricultural lands. And I would hope that I have nothing against alternative energy systems. In fact, I would be one of the proponents in supporting government on seeing that sector grow and improve. But I really would like to think that as we move along, that we are not utilizing our best agricultural lands for this purpose. And so it is just to urge government to continue to be very careful in how it is utilizing the agricultural land. And we are really getting down to the stage now where we have to ask ourselves, is there still a critical, are we at the level now where we still have a critical amount of agricultural land available that agricultural can continue to be a viable sector. And so, Mr. President, one of the things that I would like to suggest, again, in the physical development plan, I think it was, which again, the 2017, we recognize, or the issue, the question was raised, that there are several developed lots, I believe, which have been transferred out of agriculture, which have had a change in use, but are still sitting idle and nothing has happened with them. And I would like to think that as we think about our housing policy, we start to look at those areas. We start to look at the city of Bridgetown again. We start to look at the areas where we have direct housing settlements and see how we can utilize that land to re-energize the whole housing sector without having to continually deplete the already scarce agricultural resources. And so while, as I said, while I understand the issues and the pressures and the demands for land for alternative uses, I would just end by by urging the government to continue to seriously manage our lands for the best of our people, and that I don't want to be driving around Barbados one day and everywhere I see buildings and houses and so on. I like to drive through the country and see some nice green areas and so on. And I hope that this will be continued as we move ahead. And with those few words, Mr. President, I am obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Cummings, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to express appreciation to all the honourable members who have spoken in this debate on this resolution. And I want to begin my wrap-up by answering one particular question. There was a question that was asked around how many houses are being built at this location. I believe that the Honourable Minister, in his very extensive presentation, would have shared that construction of 28 single units is underway at Bullins, and it is expected that by December 16th of this year, 15 of those units will be completed and ready for handover, and that by January 2025, in a month and a half or so from now, that the additional 13 units will be made available. This is information that has been shared before by the Honourable Minister with responsibility for agriculture. Now, Mr. President, in my closing, want to deal with a couple of things. I want to take the time, Mr. President, to say that there is always going to be, if we are to hear the words of Senator John King, there's always going to be an inherent tension for land use. That is a fact in a place where land is not an infinite resource. We are not Guyana. We don't have acres and acres and acres of open land and jungle and virgin territory. We are not Brazil that borders 8 countries. We are 166 square miles, and there is no hills. And technical officials assess using the best technology, the best expertise, the skills, continuing professional learnings that they're doing to be able to guide the government on how to make the best use of what resources it has. A planner on any given day, Mr. President, has to make determinations about land for housing, land for schools, lands for commercial development, lands for hotel development, whether beachfront or roadside lands. It has to make determinations about lands for housing, for low-income housing, or whether it is going to be condos and villas. Every single day, planners have to negotiate those tensions between how we use lands. This is no utopia where you just have lands appearing out of nowhere that are earmarked for one thing versus the other. We're always going to battle that tension. And governments with the best technical advice available to it from its technicians should make those decisions in the interest of its people. I don't know if the notion of there being the most economic use for land is even something that on its own stands. Because, Mr. President, there are social costs, there are environmental costs, there are all kinds of physical other attributes that are typically to be considered when making a decision. And so there's more than one variable that is considered when making decisions on land use. The resolution before us speaks about a plot of land that has not been in agricultural production since the late 1980s. It has not. It does not mean, and I believe I said so in my presentation, that the activities that were being undertaken on that site were not and have not been incorporated elsewhere. I said so. The ornamental industry that we spoke about, and I'm sure I talked about anthuriums and lilies and so on, that work, those commercial activities have been integrated into the soil conservation unit. The officers have been integrated into the Ministry of Agriculture, and we now have a relocation of the agricultural functions there. There will always be tension in 166 square miles for the use of land. And any attempt to make Barbadians feel otherwise is doing Barbados a disservice, and it is misleading to the people of this country. Now, I have listed how the houses are to be constructed, and I've talked about the way in which processes are used, Mr. President, in the public service to inform political decisions or policy decisions. Now, Mr. President, I want to go back to the Auditor General's reports. Now, when we cite Auditor General's reports, let's be clear, there is a difference between a cost overrun as a result of increasing shipping costs, underestimation, and an increase in cost or an Auditor General's report that speaks to mismanagement, failure to follow due process, a failure to follow the tendering process. That is a different matter than an Auditor General report that speaks about costs on their own, but does not suggest any malfeasance. There is a difference, Mr. President, and I believe one of the honourable senators made a point, and I want to go into the same Auditor General's report, speaking about the question of low-income housing. This government, when we came to office, definitely shared a concern, and I think it's a legitimate concern to be raised even now. When you are building a house or building houses for low-income owners, ostensibly, they have to be affordable to low-income earners. And that is why I pointed out that for these projects under the government's housing program, the government has sought to ensure that we, in the absence of a Barbados mortgage finance, and for the very purpose of making it affordable to low-income earners, that the financing mechanisms would be innovative. That's how we had the HOPE project. Homeowners producing energy, so that you're using the roof and the creation of energy to be able to subsidize the pricing. That's why we have introduced lease to own, rent to own schemes that allow you to pay rent or pay lease type sums, and then at the end of a designated period, that is converted into a property that you own. So there's more than one way to get to the final destination, and we have attempted to use those. But Mr. President, in the Auditor General report of 2016, it makes this point. On Valerie and Grotto, yes, high rises. And the government has already, in this incarnation as well, made reference to the fact that we will have to go up and that there will be a need for more high rises, and that there will be a need for us to consider duplexes, which we've already built some of, quads, which we've already built some of. If you go up White Park Road, behind the Ministry of Energy, and on the other side of the road, you'll see those already there. And yes, multi-story complexes, but multi-story complexes and high-rises, Mr. President, in places like Valerie, with multiple levels that don't even have an elevator in them, and people have to walk those stairs. That's a problem. That's a problem. So you now have to look at what the cost implications will be for building high-rises over a certain level and integrating elevator capacity, and yes, the important question of maintenance. But let me come back to this report. The NHC has indicated that housing units for low-income earners should be provided at a cost of $125,000 to $195,000. However, the construction costs of these high-rise units range from $300,000 and $450,000 per unit. Even though all of the units were built within the agreed time frame, the high cost per unit obtained within these projects would have impacted negatively on the NHC being able to provide these units to low-income earners without substantial subsidization. This is the reality of when we talk about low-income housing. It has to be affordable for low-income earners. Valerie and Grotto, by this report, were not. They were not. And the Auditor General report of 2014 says so. It goes on, if we're not clear, the corporation bases rental rates for its high-rise apartments on the construction costs of the buildings, recovered over a 35-year period. With the introduction of legislation which allows the transfer of ownership to tenants after renting for a period of more than 20 or 30 years, it is not clear why the 35-year payback period is being used. It should also be noted, in the case of Valerie high-rise apartment units, certain costs were not considered. These included the cost of land on which the units were built, which was $400,000 in the 80s, a variation cost of $630,000, an interest penalty, and at the Grotto, the cost of land, $6.766 million, and interest penalty of $784,000 were not included. So, Mr. President, low-income earners, yes, we all agree clearly, need to be able to have access to low-income housing. That is a fact. But But I want to navigate, Mr. President, the question of speed. I want to talk about speed for a minute. Mr. President, look, I believe that Senator King, when he spoke just now, he said, none of us in this room have ever been homeless, certainly not to the best of my knowledge. And I don't know everyone's personal story, but I don't think anyone here has ever been homeless. None of us have ever had our houses, our homes, where we live, where we raise our families, where we lay our head down at night, ravaged by a storm, whether it was Thomas, which we came to office and still found people unaccounted for as a result of that, whether it was Elsa, where we have had over the last little while, and I believe that the Honourable Minister of Housing in his report spoke about the number of persons who have been accounted for and accommodated under the UDC, the RDC, and the NHC as a result of Hurricane Elsa. But we've never had to experience what that looks like, or having to run for your house in the middle of a storm. Mr. President, try telling any of those people who need urgent housing that you want to wait until you build houses over the longest period of time, and you're not going to assist them by trying to find technology and solutions that will expedite the time that they will be able to get a roof over their house, their heads, Mr. President. There are some things which are urgent. There are some things which require no action. We can't sit down from our detached middle class bubbles and talk about, oh, we should allow these people to come in and build the houses when we don't have roofs over, when people don't have roofs over their houses, over their heads. That's not something that we can do as a government, Mr. President. It has to be done now, and it has to be a priority. It is the reason why, together with the Ministry of Housing and the Ministry with responsibility for people empowerment, there were persons who were accommodated immediately, whether they were accommodated in apartments, in hotels, in Mangrove, in the Labour College, whether they were accommodated in group housing, all of the arrangements that needed to be made to put people in housing on a short-term basis because of the immediacy of the situation with Hurricane Elsa. And that was what needed to happen at the time, Mr. President. The response over time, however, would then have necessitated the construction, either the repair of those houses or the provision of new houses to be able to allow those persons to live once again in dignity. And I want to share what the Minister of Housing shared in the other place when he spoke about Hurricane Elsa. He talks about over 679 repairs having been completed to date, while a total of 535 houses have been built over the corresponding period. He talked about the fact that the expenditure for those houses, both repairs and new builds, was $86 million, $148,310.82. The Honourable Minister of Housing went on to break down how the repairs and the replacement housing was done for Hurricane Elsa under the NHC. Repairs completed on the NHC were 503 houses. Under the Rural Development Commission, there were 83 houses. Under the Urban Development Commission, there were 93 houses, bringing us to a total of 679,000. So to say, Mr. President, that this government to date has not built and has not put the effort into housing and accommodating persons affected both by Hurricane Elsa and, yes, by Hurricane Thomas, tropical storm. Actually, no, Thomas was not even a hurricane. Thomas was a tropical storm. We were not even a government when Thomas passed through this country. We still found ourselves accommodating persons from Tropical Storm Thomas and those under Hurricane Elsa, Mr. President. That is the Barbados Labour Party. That is what we did, Mr. President. The RDC then went on, Mr. President, to complete 83 repairs, house repairs, at an overall cost of $3.9 million and 156 rebuilds at an overall cost of $16.5 million. The Urban Development Commission completed 93 repairs at an overall cost of $3.6 million and 133 rebuilds at $11.4 million. This is a government that should hang its head in shame on housing and a provision of support. No, Mr. President, those numbers don't support that. And so I want to say, in support of the Honourable Senator our own, we call him affectionately New Rev, but the public of Barbados, Reverend, Canon, Doctor. I never remember what your order is, but Senator Rogers, in his conversation with the nation, made several important points. And I want to take the opportunity to close on at least one of them. Mr. President, I don't know if it is possible for there to be a 25-year plan. In the energy sector alone, we have had 3-year plans and they have become outdated. They've had to evolve. Life happens, countries change, dynamic evolves, international circumstances change, costs evolve, our national circumstances may evolve. So 25-year plans are long range at best. But the idea that plans should not be made on short-term electoral cycles is something that I believe this Barbados Labour Party government certainly supports. If it is a good policy, there's nothing wrong with continuing said policy. Mr. President, I remember under the Right Honourable Oenath, there was a Barbados National Development Plan. It was actually, interestingly, a 30-year plan. There was a national development plan until 2008 when it ceased to exist in the mind of the government at the time. It was rubbished, discarded, and not seen as having any worth. But it was a policy that had been developed not just by persons who were specialists in their disciplines, but public officials who in their own right felt they had something to contribute to their country in its long-range planning. It was rubbished in 2008, never to be spoken of again. In our incarnation, you have heard me earlier today, Mr. President, say the Coverley model, for example, is something that not only did we continue, but we have replicated, and we can say that where it is justly appropriate and true. But we don't sit, Mr. President, like some do, and get glee over small points that they think they have made or small digs that they think they have made, because we function in the world where facts still matter. Facts still matter. So there are some who may think that they have made some great contribution to a conversation by dwelling in half-truths, mistruths, misleading information that does not reflect the reality, and in some instances the disservice that is being done to the public of Barbados by not telling people what really is involved in governance over a long-range period of time. That is not mature democracy. That is not mature leadership. And we have to have honest conversations with our country. Agriculture is not dead. Today is not an agriculture debate, so I'm not going to get into the details of the agriculture sector even slightly. But agriculture is not dead, and the Minister of Agriculture, I am sure, is perfectly competent in his own right at the appropriate occasion to speak on the matter of the government's future plans for agriculture. What I can say to you is that today's housing debate has been reflective not just of what the government has intended to do at Bullins, but what the government is doing more broadly, and the government will continue to have open conversations, whether in this chamber, in the other place, via press conferences, via public statements, via press releases, and I encourage everyone to look in the authentic places for news and information on what the government's policies are. The government is not short on sharing, not short on talking. All of the information that is oftentimes asked for is there for all to see and all to be able to analyze and ask questions on. And we commit, Mr. President, to continuing to support the housing agenda of this country, which is not a Barbados Labour Party agenda alone, but it is a Barbados agenda. And that is most fitting today on the eve of November 30th. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. The question is that this resolution, Order Number 9, passing of resolution for the vesting of land in the National Housing Corporation at Holders Hill in the parish of St. James, do not pass. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This resolution is therefore passed.
Order number 3, sir.
Order number 3.
In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, and which has been assigned to Senator Honourables C.J. Blackman, Minister in the Ministry of Finance, and he will be moving today the passing of a resolution that Parliament of Barbados take note of the Barbados Population Policy 2023.
Senator Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me, in this late hour of the afternoon, come to you, Mr. President, and colleagues in the Senate, on a very important resolution, namely focusing on the National Population Commission. Now, this commission plays a very important role in the country's development prospects. And I start there so as to set the tone for those who are following this debate as to why this resolution is here and the importance of it going forward, not just in the ordinary context of resolutions, but as we have continued to show over the last 6 years as an administration, bringing to Parliament bills and resolutions that matter to the people of the country, not just in a 5-year cycle between elections, but policies that will transform this country long beyond the cycle of elections. And why am I saying that? This resolution today is one, I am sure, if you listen to the public discourse on population, is one where our people continue to have to treat to the issue of where is Barbados going, what will that future look like, and what are the ingredients necessary for that prosperity to rest upon. We talk about growth, we talk about development, we talk about having the requisite fiscal policy space, we talk about the climate crisis and the fight against the climate crisis, we talk about resilience, we talk about food security. All of these things are necessary cogs within the broader strategy of the long-term development of Barbados. But equally, and perhaps depending on how you see it, Mr. President, importantly, or more importantly, depending on where you want to land on the issue of the population of Barbados and the future of Barbados and the future of our population of this country is therefore an important matter as we have to now look to the future and address a number of realities and challenges and opportunities coming out of those challenges with respect to where we want our country to go. And I start on that basis, therefore, and want to remind the House and the public at large that the National Population Commission was established some 7 months after this administration would have come into office in 2018. And of course, the Cabinet would have approved this. And you may ask yourself, so what's the relevance and the importance of the Population Commission? And just by brief introduction to share with the public, one, to produce and to publish a population situation analysis, commonly known in the speak, PSA, on the size and the structure and the health and the skills of the population over the next 20 years, on the assumption that no active population policy had been there at the time. So again, you heard it in different debates, Mr. President, but notwithstanding that we had major fires out when we first came to office in 2018, it is almost as if this administration became a firefighting entity. notwithstanding our fire service, but of course, the political speak, there were challenges that we had to confront. But notwithstanding those challenges, the government saw it fit, as we do in our typical Labour Party style and philosophy, notwithstanding the challenges that you have before you, you still have to keep your eye on the long-term prize of development. And that is why I'm happy to be part of this administration. And secondly, and importantly, the focus of the Population Commission was to develop a draft national population policy so as to be presented, of course, to Cabinet for approval, based around setting the policy goals and population goals, and targeted interventions and strategies so as to reduce the population-related impediments in achieving government's medium-term and long-term economic and social goals, including recommendations that relate to legislation. Now, at this point, before I go further into the presentation, Mr. President, with your indulgence, allow me to thank and highlight a number of persons who would have worked tirelessly, and I really want to treat to this, some of whom are here in the gallery from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment. Namely, we have with us, Mr. President, Mr. Patrick McCaskey, who is the Acting Permanent Secretary within the Ministry. We have Ms. Renelle Savory, also, who is the Acting Chief Economist. Not here with us, but equally to the task and made a significant contribution, is Ms. Carolyn Wythe, who is an economist in the Ministry. And when we look at the actual members of the Commission itself, and allow me to share with you and to the public who they were, or are rather. The Chair, Ms. Roberta Clark. The Deputy Chair, Ms. Waynell Aline Jones. Ms. Paula Bayer, Dr. Yolanda Aline, Dr. Jonathan Lashley, Dr. Madhuvanti Murphy, Mr. Pierce Rudder, Ms. Janelle Scantleberry Munzi, Mr. Jerome Wood, and Mr. Delano Scantleberry. Now, of course, the Research and Planning Unit within the Ministry of Economic Affairs serves as its secretariat, as it were. But the point I'm making is this, is that similar to what was said in a previous intervention today, Mr. President, this government, notwithstanding our vision, notwithstanding our policy pursuits, we work hand in hand, tirelessly, with technical teams who provide yeoman service under sometimes, and we know, some tough conditions. Because this government came into the administration and leadership of the country with a pursuit of delivering for the people of Barbados. And I want to take this opportunity to commend again the Permanent Secretary and the Chief Economist and all of our team in Economic Affairs, and to the commissioners who made themselves available to serve in helping this country to navigate the way forward on this critical and important matter. And I want to say that where we are today is not any fly-by-night or two-morning process. There were a number of consultations, consultation after consultation, which provided the backdrop for us as policymakers and those in the ministry to really see what are the issues, what are the frameworks necessary, what is the roadmap that we will need to go in really unpacking these issues. And some of the issues that came up and that we're focused on, of course, we looked at the socio-economic and labor force dimensions of population dynamics. We also took the opportunity, and those consultations yielded discussions around the issue of human resource development, labor force participation and supply and demand, the very important nature of competitiveness, diaspora, connectivity and remittance. And why do I pause here? Oftentimes we see our population only in terms of those who live within the borders of our shores. But Barbados has a very vast and robust diaspora around the world. And allow me to also pay kudos to our diaspora, whether they be in North America, in Europe, in the Caribbean, Latin America, Asia, Africa, Arab world. Because why? In addition to the remittances, of course, that families have been and continue to send to our country, it presents a major untapped, and I shouldn't say untapped because we've started as an administration to tap into it. And I know Senator King is actively involved with working with our diaspora, Minister Monroe Knight the same, so as to ensure that as we build out our policy space in the country, we tap into the significant skills that our citizens in Barbados continue to bring to bear, notwithstanding that they don't physically live here anymore. But their love and commitment to Barbados is a testament to where we need to go as a country and as a people. And why is this further important, Mr. President? Barbadians have left the shores in different pursuits, oftentimes, and regretful, and Senator King and Senator Monroe Knight can speak to this one as well. Only this year, many Barbadians for the first time would have learned that this country produced not one, not two, but 3 presidents in Liberia. Barbadians have been in the business of going around the world and building new partnerships, new relationships, and building new skills, but that can help this country. And equally, Barbadians went to Panama and built the canal, the Carolinas, North and South Carolina, developed and founded by Barbadians, and bringing it now into the modern era. Our population continues to do well in international organizations, in regional organizations, in the multilateral development space. What is the point I'm making? Our country continues to punch above its weight in every sphere of endeavor, not only within these 166 square miles that we have, but everywhere we go, carrying on their sleeves and their hearts the aspirations of a nation. And long may this continue. And I really want to use that point to also say to those in society who believe that the same way, and Mr. President, what is interesting, Mr. President, is the fact that when Barbadians do well around the world, every Bajan here is proud. Every Bajan here is proud. We are proud if they're doing well in sports, if they're living abroad and taking up a top position in a top Fortune 500 company, leading a world international organization, a sporting team. But therefore, Mr. President, Barbadians are, and we have to be equally on the reverse, not have an adverse reaction when persons come from around the world and come into our shores and enjoy the prospects that we have as a country. Because it can't be that we are proud to have our people leave and take up positions elsewhere in the world, but when persons from elsewhere in the world come here, we have a problem. We are not a hypocritical people, Mr. President. We are a people of honor and dignity and respect, and I'm happy that this particular debate and resolution is coming literally on the eve, 5.5 hours away from our 50th independence in this chamber. A chamber that historically none of us in here could have been here on the basis of our color, or on the basis, therefore, that we had no land, no property, no business. And therefore, we must now see this debate in the way that it must be crafted, that having come from the bosoms of 400 years of unfortunate and oppressive colonization, an independent nation, a republic nation, how do we now treat to the issue of where do we go for our prosperity and our further sovereignty in a way that our population must now anchor the success that we've hitherto become known to enjoy and to provide our people, whether that be providing free healthcare at the point of delivery. And note what I said, free healthcare at the point of delivery, because it is not free. It is not free. Someone has to pay. The taxpayers pay for it. Every taxpayer pays for it. Free education, as I said, free healthcare, all at the point of delivery. Public transport, subsidized by the government. Roads, all these things that we do as a country, providing sanitation facilities in terms of our trucks. And you know, we take these things, and perhaps, as I said, and why and I don't see this as a contentious bill, and that's my view. Because why? It provides us the perfect opportunity on the eve of independence just to use it also, not just to talk about the population, but to use it within that context to talk about where we go and how do we use this debate and independence to reposition our thinking on critical matters of our socio-economic development. And I go a little further, Mr. President. The discussions and consultations also focus on urbanization and the changes in population distribution, internal migration patterns, of course, land ownership and land use, which of course has been a major topic of discourse and debate in a previous discussion in this chamber. But we go on also, it focused on health factors and demographic changes, looking at the growth trajectory, of course, of the population within the confines of the demographic transition, issues of fertility and fertility changes, and the age structure, the health services, Mr. President, and the delivery of service, morbidity, mortality, and the epidemiological transitions. Importantly also, the consultations looked at the implications of population dynamics on social protection. Of course, we've been talking about national insurance, etc., and the social arrangements of care. And it also focused on migration. I touched on it a little while ago. And in it, under that head, they looked at the CARICOM single market and economy and regional movement of people, international migration, the transitory population, and of course, perspectives on migration. Now, if I should touch very briefly, Mr. President and colleagues, on the aspect of regional migration. This country, particularly if you know your history, and I believe all those in public life ought to know the history of Barbados, particularly within the last 70, 80 years, and our interconnectedness and our forever link with respect to regional development. Lest we forget that it was our national hero, the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Adams, who was the first and only Prime Minister of the West Indies Federation, who led at the time the region into where it needed to go, notwithstanding the difficulties that pursued or ensued thereafter. But we fast forward to the 1980s, 1990s, where given the leadership of Barbados within the context of the region, the regional bodies or leaders in CARICOM made it clear that given the history of Barbados and its commitment to regional integration, that it would lead under the revised Treaty of the Chaguaramas, the prime ministerial responsibility with respect to the single market and the economy. Why am I making that point? Grantley Adams and other leaders of this country thereafter, and I can go to Sir Harold Bernard St. John, Tom Adams, Earl Barrow, Owen Arthur, and now our current Prime Minister Motley, have all made it very clear that this country that we call home cannot, and I repeat, cannot contemplate its future without a comprehensive appreciation, understanding, and connectedness with our brothers and sisters across the region. Cannot. And that should not be a debate. It should not be a political divide. Because why? Barbados does well when CARICOM and Caribbean does well. And it takes a significant level of political maturity, and certainly our party, the party of Grantley Adams, as I described, Mr. President, is very clear in our mind. It's rooted in our philosophy. And equally, historically, our country broadly has gone in that direction. Now, from time to time, Mr. President, there have been administrations that have unfortunately saw it fit to treat our brothers and sisters from some CARICOM and Caribbean nations less than fitting, and less than who we are as a people of Barbados. And let me go on the record to say, therefore, that all future generations of public figures and politicians in this country must never exercise on our brothers and sisters across the Caribbean, well, anywhere in the world, but in particular, our Caribbean brothers and sisters, treat them in a way that we ourselves would not want to be treated. But life has a way of sometimes correcting many, many wrongs. And that is why the good book says, Mr. President, if you humble yourself, I will exalt you. But if you exalt yourself, I will humble you. And luckily for us, we are part of a country right now led by Prime Minister Morley, who is providing stellar leadership, not just for Barbados, but for the rest of the region, particularly in the context of her prime ministerial portfolio on the single market and economy. And I make that case because why? If our population, if our prospects for trade and growth and development are to materialize in a significant way, we now have to use the CARICOM single market and economy in a way that we've not done. The policies are there, the framework is there, the treaty is there, the revised treaty is there. But let's ask ourselves, how have we unpacked all that have gone before us? Prime Minister Morley has and continues to make her contribution. We have a CCJ where our own Sir David Simmons was the champion of the CCJ. We have the institutions. Barbados is at the core of CARICOM. But in the context of a population discussion, ask ourselves, do we have an adequate population size? And I know this one continues to be one that is very dear to many people. Some people informed, many people uninformed. And I want for us to, as a nation, contemplate a future where Barbados serves as an anchor to the region, notwithstanding our small size, but a country that has the prowess economically, socially, underscored by strong social institutions in education, strong social institutions in terms of law and the rule of law, and institutions that provide for growth and development. And if our manufacturers, current and future to come, are to have markets across the region, they have to look to our region. Of course, you look further afield. But the question also is, how do we ensure that the movement of our citizens into CARICOM and our brothers and sisters into Barbados is a more seamless one where we can unlock our true potential as a region. And therefore, within the context of population, how do we ensure that as our population moves outside to tap into new areas of growth and development, that we also still have on the ground here in the country an adequate level of citizens and residents that can service our development and prospect needs. And therefore, CARICOM provides us also with that strategic buffer where our brothers and sisters can come with their skills and their families, not only to make up a number, but to add significant value to our country's development. Now, when you look at some of the general findings of the Population Situational Analysis Report, Mr. President, you would see a number of staggering figures, very staggering figures. And I want to encourage our country on our eve of independence and Republic Day to listen to these figures, and as they eat a nice conky tomorrow, ask themselves, how can we address some of these, yes, and conkies with raisins, how can we address these challenges? What are some of the challenges that the PSA yielded? Barbados has had a consistent decrease in birth and fertility rates since 1960. I repeat that, Mr. President, because it's quite staggering. Since 1960, Barbados has had a decrease in both its birth and fertility rates. Second of all, the fertility rate has been below replacement rate since 1980. Now, it's interesting that most CARICOM countries are facing similar declines in birth and fertility rates. Now, of course, there has been increases in the aging population and progression of large-sized cohorts to older ages. Equally, it also yielded that Barbados had one of the lowest population growth rates, namely 24% within the context of CARICOM between 1960 and 2018, which is some 6 years ago. And in 2018, Barbados had the highest population density, of course, in the CARICOM space. And interestingly, migration via the CSME has not significantly added to the population working age. Now I remember, and I use this last point importantly, because you would remember a lot of discourse, particularly in the 2000s, and I remember at that time, Senator Monroe, you were in CPDC, and on the vanguard of helping the region to usher through the context of the single market and economy. There was a lot of discourse, Mr. President, you may recall, where there was a fear of an influx of citizens from around the region into Barbados, because persons were saying we had this strong pull factor and that we were going to be overcrowded with citizens from across the region. The facts and the report has yielded that this is not true. Not at all. And as it is saying, that notwithstanding, of course, citizens from the region have come, it has not added significantly to the population working age. In other words, we still are woefully short of people to work here. Now, there are those who will say we have too many people on island, and that is not true. Because in a small society, if you see a lot of people, you think, ooh, there are too many. But in terms of our economic needs, our social needs, and I want to stress on the social needs, our social needs that we've enjoyed and that have been catered to over the last 40, 50 years have been met because of a population being able to service them in national insurance and everything in terms of education, etc. But because of this decline, we now have to correct a number of wrongs. And sometimes if you scroll through social media and you pick up our phones, you go on our tablets, you go on wherever, you hear the argument, how can we increase the population but I already have 1 or 2 children? You hear the argument, Mr. President, the cost of raising a family is not the cheapest. You hear the arguments that you want us to get more children, where can we put them? And part of that conversation, funny enough, is in this report. Because why? This also helps us to, as policymakers, understand the needs of the country going short, medium, and long term, and where we need to go in terms of housing, in terms of provision of education facilities. And equally, one of the things coming out of the report is that because of the situation where the population is not growing as fast as it should, there are more spaces also within our education system. I remember back in my time, and I'm still a young man, Mr. President, 25 years old. But seriously, when I was in secondary school, you would have on average plus or minus 30 students in a class. Now, on average, you're looking probably 21 or so. Because why? The drop in population is starting to manifest in a very real way. And I want to use that as a point of further reflection and departure. Because why? Because our people are not getting children at the rate that we would need to replenish our numbers significantly. And another way of putting this, the impact on the economy is tremendous. And why do I say this? They might ask, so then we need to get more children. But even if, Mr. President, and I've said this before in another place, even if all of us in this country tonight on the eve of independence had to try to contribute to solving this problem, We wouldn't adjourn just yet, Mr. President. If all of us tonight in this country, over a fine dinner and a Barbadian spirit, the oldest rum in the world, decided that we are going to put ourselves in a place to try to address this problem, 9 months from now, we would have a short fix in terms of numbers. But in terms of working age and contributing to the national insurance system and everything, that will take another 18 years for us to treat to the problem. Why am I saying that? We therefore have to find a solution now and in the medium term to reposition the country to be in a way to treat to this shortfall of a shortage on our population. Because why, as I said, and to make it in simple language, we have more people dying yearly than people that are being born. Very simple. And that is the challenge. So the question then becomes, how do we treat to it? Of course, the report also looked at the dynamic and the nexus between the population dynamics on infrastructure, as I said, on the labor force, the health sector. And the main findings are that over the next 30 years, the dependency ratio will grow to nearly 2 dependents per person of working age, Mr. President, with a higher presence of elderly dependents by the year 2050. So we're talking another 25 years, 26 if you add the extra month that we have for the rest of the year. Equally, care of elderly currently accounts for just under 20% of total health expenditure and is expected to nearly double its demand for financing. In other words, our population, now we're not getting higher births, but our people are living longer. And the question is, how do we now ensure that we have the amount of working population that can service the needs of our citizens and residents who are living longer, and therefore tapping into our national social security protection system, national insurance as we call it. This is a real conversation and contemplation that our people must go through. And one, then there's accepted an agreement here that the population is not growing as fast as it should. Two, we're not replenishing it in the way and at the rate that it should. And three, the births are not coming as fast as they should because our people are not engaging in that midnight run as they once did, perhaps in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. We now have to address this frontally. And perhaps I look forward to my good friend, Senator Walters, in guiding us through on how we can treat to this. I know Senator Walters, Mr. President, has made his contribution. I think I fall woefully short. I've only made one contribution to the overall number. I'm being advised by my leader that it is not too late. But in the lateness of the evening, Mr. President, I wouldn't want to engage in such activities. However, when we look therefore at housing, and we've looked at housing earlier, Mr. President, but because of the decline of the rate, notwithstanding, of course, there's a demand, significant demand for housing, for future population needs. Given where we are right now, there is adequate, and not adequate in its totality, but there will be adequate housing for the growth in population. And what is beautiful about this, and I want the population to cast their eyes to the Barbados Investment Plan 2035, because that plan outlines a clear roadmap as to the investment needs of the country, sector by sector, and the government is working to ensure that investment in housing is also matching the priorities with respect to where our population needs will grow. Because the truth of it is, and which brings me to this other part of my presentation, given the fact that we are not having enough births and we need people, We are going to have a real conversation as a nation, and that's why I'm so happy that this conversation is happening on the eve of our Independence and Republic Day. We have to have, therefore, a real conversation, having accepted that we have a low rate of births. We need people. And if Senator Rogers and those on this side, yourself, Mr. President, we've all played our part in some way or form, but it's necessary but not sufficient. We therefore have to look outward to bring in people into our country. And that is why also too, the strategy to engage our diaspora is so important. Mr. President, the diaspora is not just the first generation or second generation of Barbadians, but it is also a number of persons around the world who have their Bajan parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. And the government, of course, is looking to expand the areas and to see how far back we can go, because that unearths, therefore, a wider pool for us to consider. And a number of persons from the diaspora have contributed significantly to this country, both in and outward. And it's almost a sense of history and fate that, again, this debate is taking place within the context of the diaspora and population on the eve of our independence. Because tomorrow, Mr. President, would mark the 100th anniversary of the birth of a titan, a political force, a woman who has transcended every conceivable barrier that you can think of, a woman who was born in Brooklyn, United States, New York, United States, coming here at a tender age with her mother, who was a Barbadian, and lived with her grandmother. Who am I speaking about, Mr. President? None other than Shirley Chisholm. And tomorrow would be her 100th birthday had she been alive. And I want for us as a nation to forever give reverence to her for what she's been able to achieve, not just as the first elected woman to the United States Congress, but equally the first person to seek nomination in a major political party in the United States, who was an African-American woman, who was African-American and woman, who then led the way to open the door for many of the great political figures we now know. So before Hillary Clinton ran for president of the United States, of course, as a woman, there was Shirley Chisholm. Before Barack Obama became the first African-American to run for, to run and win for president of the United States, Shirley Chisholm paved the way. She did not win the presidential nomination, but she paved the way. So much so that one of his, meaning President Obama's, pursuits when he was president was to honor her formally as president for her contributions. And let me take the time to commend Prime Minister Motley and Minister Monroe Knight and Senator King and those in the Ministry of Culture and Foreign Affairs, the Prime Minister's office, who have been actively working around the clock to ensure that as we celebrate our anniversary of independence and Republic Day tomorrow, that of equal measure, the country is paying homage to Shirley Chisholm in a major way. We have a situation where members of the United States Congress, if they haven't landed already, are coming to Barbados. And they will be actively involved in our independence celebrations tomorrow on the 100th anniversary of the birth of Shirley Chisholm. And why do I say it with such pride, Mr. President? I have to say it. I went to the same primary school as Shirley Chisholm, the Vauxhall Primary School, now known as the Shirley Chisholm Primary School. I lived in the same neighborhood and still live in the same neighborhood as where Shirley Chisholm grew up, Vauxhall. And therefore, greatness can come from Vauxhall, Mr. President. But equally, on a more serious note, greatness has and can and must come from Barbados, notwithstanding our origin or economic class or whatever. she has left the template. And what's interesting, if you watch the movie that they did on Netflix and you watch the documentaries on her life, you go to the museums in Brooklyn and New York, you would see that Shirley Chisholm never lost her Caribbean-ness. She never lost a Bajan accent. As a matter of fact, she spoke with eloquence in Bajan and in English with a Bajan accent. And she had deep political battles in the United States Congress, in the New York legislature, in a Bajan way. When you look at her, you can see some of the antics that a lot of our politicians in this country have. The sassiness, the class, the vigor, the robustness, some of the robustness that we see engaging in this house and the other place. And why is that important? Our population must give to the world. And Barbados must be a conduit and an environment, for people to thrive, people to go to the world and conquer. And not conquer in the traditional sense of our colonial past, but conquer in a way where we add value. And as in the words of Shirley Chisholm, we must be unbought and unbossed. No one must determine for us who we align ourselves to and what our foreign policy looks like, what it feels like. No one must tell us that notwithstanding that a hurricane is on your door every year and there are climatic events that cause you to be on the front line of disaster potentially, that you should still support us pursuing a certain economic policy. Unbought and embossed also means domestically that notwithstanding that you might have political rumblings in your political party, that you should stand up to your leader if he or she, but in this context there's no she here, if he wants to gag you, Mr. President, and tell you you can't talk to Senator Blackman because he's on the other side, and the next time you talk to him, he can get you kick out this party. Yes, these things happen, Mr. President. Man, if you only know, Senator. If you only know, Senator. But anyhow, Senator, on the other side, we were talking another time. Ain't that time yet. We ain't gonna talk it today. This is a different kind of debate. I will address Mr. President, Senator Worrell at a time. This debate today is a different one, unless I am pushing the other direction. But it provides for us the opportunity, truly, to, as we grow Barbados, Barbados must be that conduit for Bajans to prosper and to thrive. If you want to stay here, this country will provide the environment for you to thrive. If you want to go abroad, this must be the launch pad for you to launch out into the world, where you export Bajan excellence, Bajan ingenuity, Bajan everything. Just like how, for example, Sir Garfield Sobers, Rihanna, Prime Minister Motley, Rupi, you name it, John King, all of them, Alistair Hines, have done. Craig Braffett. Help me, cricket young lady. Haley Matthews. DeAndre Dotton. We have so many examples. You have Otis Gibson from Sion Hill in St. James, who not only played for Barbados, who not only played for the West Indies, but he was the coach of England. Right here in Barbados, we influence the world. And this is an independence message to our people, Mr. President, notwithstanding that this is population. Because why? We have to ensure that we influence the world. Vassar Drake's another product from St. James. Continue to influence in a major way. I can talk about Joffrey Archer. Joffrey Archer Foundation. And he won a foundation, and Mr. President, you'll be equally proud as a fellow foundation alumni with me, where Joffrey Archer, having gone to school in St. Philip, learned the cricket in the streets, in the road, at Hildeskeen, in the neighborhood, went on to foundation school, and then he went on to represent England and won a World Cup for England. Now, we may take these things for granted. I certainly don't. You have Jordan, what's his name? Chris Chris Jordan.
Come with me.
Yes, he went to the other school. I understand, I think Senator was his teacher? Exactly, I wouldn't hold it against him. Notwithstanding. Senator Morris was his teacher, but he did well. The point I'm making is, whether we stay here, Craig Braffett, of course, Kyle Mears, Jason Holder, Gordon Greenwich, Desmond Haynes, Collis King, Black Bessie Peter, of course. The point is, whether we choose to stay here in Barbados, Mr. President, or whether we choose to migrate temporarily or long-term, Bajans influence. But we must influence strategically and with humility. And therefore, when you look at the discussion on population increase and the urban sprawl, it also has implications for our coastal development. How are our migration patterns domestically also going to treat for planning in terms of where we build our houses, our hotels, our facilities of recreation? Because why? As Senator Cummins said in the earlier debate, Barbados' land is finite. Yes, we're a large ocean state, but how we plan to build our facilities, the population size will determine a number of things. And therefore, the context of both urban renewal and rural renewal is a very real thing that we must treat to. Now, when we look at some of the institutions that would have helped us in this front, I want to publicly commend, certainly as Minister for Economic Affairs, the United Nations Population Fund, who would have worked hand in hand at the onset, from the time they knew and they were approached by the government of Barbados in helping us to build out what we have here before us today. And let me place on record the government's appreciation to the United Nations Population Fund and their team at this time. And also the services of Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, who would have worked in a consultative capacity as well, in helping us to build out, given his expertise. And the point, therefore, Mr. President, is that we are on the cusp of significant transformation. Yes, we have our debates from time to time in and out of this chamber, but every Bajan, irrespective of political divide, must be proud, in my view, and this is the view on this side, must be proud of where we're going as a country. But there's a major thing that can impede that prospect. And therefore, the policy goal of increasing the population size so as to sustain the levels of social care and productivity and labor force participation is critical. And second of all, providing Barbadians, and this is in the actual consultation that they had, providing Barbadians and non-Barbadians alike with the future opportunities for personal and collective growth. Thirdly, promoting integrated settlement development and safeguarding of ecological balance. Because why? As the population grows, yes, we admit that we need a population growing to further develop our country, but we must do so in a way that also balances our environmental and ecological footprint. Because why? A growing population uses more goods and services, and therefore equally how we treat to waste, how we treat to these types of things are key. And it would be very good for the country to also go online, go on YouTube, and look at how Singapore was able to increase its population and also balance its ecological footprint and the way forward, and having that balance so as not to harm the environment, harming the environment, but at the same time not retarding growth and development as well. And when we therefore look at the next step contemplated, we therefore come to the establishment of the intersectoral implementation group so as to develop the framework and support the implementation of this policy. And why is that key? The country therefore has to as we move forward, have a number of things, including monitoring and evaluating the policy, the space, so as to ensure that we're meeting the objectives, targets. But I want to encourage Barbadians to take ownership of this. Yes, you're not part of the commission, but as citizens, active citizenship requires us to be engaged not only in once in 5 years or as called elections. It is beyond that. Our citizenship requires of us that active engagement on these critical issues. And I also take the opportunity, particularly for those in secondary schools, teachers as well, encourage you to have discussions and debates with your student councils on the issues of population growth and where do we go in the increase of our population demands. And how do we do it? And what does the future of Barbados look like in terms of infrastructure? So if you are a young engineering student at UE, or you're doing sixth form in architecture or whatever, you should now be seeing yourself not just as a person who can draw a fantastic design or build a pier or build a bridge, but you must be contemplating as yourself as you sit before your table and seeing yourself as part of the future of this republic, trying to build infrastructure because you have to now find a way that you can build further housing, whether it be low income, medium income, or high income housing, to treat to the population trends. We have to reimagine our skill set. And how is that skill set going to be deployed in a new Barbados? If you are a nurse, ask yourself, how do you envision yourself as a nurse or a doctor in a Barbados where there are going to be persons from around the world that hitherto you may not have had to engage with their race or their whatever, that you now offer your skill set and you're constantly on the cutting edge of delivering healthcare to a new set of people. Because why? The truth is, as I said, Mr. President, we have to grow our population and we certainly can't wait 18 years. And the thing is, the 18-year analogy that I used is assuming that everybody did this now. But it would really need midnight activities every day. And we both know in a finite population that is not possible. Because if I have engagement today and activity yields in 9 months, to do that every day is not possible. So again, once I make it sort of a joke, it is true. We have to, and I hear this niggas, we have to have a serious thought process on how do we treat to this. One of the things that investors always look for, like any prudent investor or business person, Senator Walters can treat to this, is return on investment. You don't get into business unless you can see or contemplate where your return on investment is going to go. Senator Walters, I said Senator Rogers, I think, sorry. Oh, okay, perfect. And one of the things that we've been blessed as a country, within the context of the region, Mr. President, Barbados has one of the relatively larger population sizes within the single market and economy. Now, of course, we have Jamaica, 2+ million, is that the figure? 3 million, is it? Yeah. Trinidad, 1.9, I think, or just over 2. Bahamas, about 400,000. Guyana, about 600,000 to 800,000. So, relatively speaking, we have a large population. And for our population size, certainly, for our geographic size, sorry, it's high, but it's not high enough. And the question then becomes, where are we going to go where there are shortfalls? Because as I said, it's not just Barbados. This study yielded that across the region, a number of our countries are grappling with the same issue. And certainly then, at the regional level, discussions certainly quoted the Council on Trade and Economic Development must be, and I'm sure they have already, these critical issues. How does the region now position itself? Because why, as I said, investors say, when I come to your country, how am I going to get my return? You can't outprice your goods and services and therefore not relevant to the market. Because why? A lot of foreign direct investment and investors come from investors who are used to investing in markets of 200 million, 300 million, 60 million. On the lower end, 40 million, 20. You get the point, Mr. President. And therefore, a country of just shy of 300,000 people and a declining birth rate, how does the future of not just foreign direct investment, but business look like? And therefore, as a region, we have to, in my view, treat to this on a collective basis. And first of all, internally, there should be that freedom of movement that we've long discussed, where we can meet our needs. And to those who cannot fight the urge of xenophobia, I want to say to you, history has shown us that those who you relegated are now the fastest growing economy in the world. Humble yourself. And we have to learn that lesson. We have to learn that lesson. But equally, the government will continue, of course, to provide the space for our Barbadians to thrive. But Barbadians must also, as I said, see the world, Mr. President, as its playground, as it were, to use the phrase. I, in my own personal experience, the leader of government business is him. When she would have gone to UK and Kenya, working not on behalf of Barbados, but on behalf of member states through the Commonwealth Secretariat, using the skills that she would have gleaned here and gotten here in Barbados, and at UE, and in Washington, D.C., when she served the mission there. And she then went on and moved from serving Barbados in an international context and further abroad. I too, similarly, did the same thing. Left this little rock, went to the UK, worked at the Commonwealth Secretariat, went to Geneva as our representative there, went to the ILO, and then served a broader global space, but still carrying my Bajan-ness and the flag of Barbados. And I want to encourage every single person in this country, that is now the republic that we must march forward and chart. Because this is not about saying I have a Bajan passport and I want to travel down to the islands and go and, buy a bus up shot and come back. No, fine, do that on a weekend. But ask yourself, how do you use your passport? How do you use your passport to see the world? Not just to shop and to travel and to go on Instagram and TikTok. That is good. But to use your passport and say, as a country with a strong passport, a strong education system, a global outlook, how can I now move through the world and influence the world, and to also use my God-given talent to help influence. And therefore, our population now must also help the country to bring in foreign exchange, technology transfer, and bring in some of those ideas into this country. And it provides for me, in my view, the basis on which the future of Barbados should look like. An outwardly looking, competitive and robust jurisdiction anchored by serious Bajan values, humility, even though, of course, our motto says pride and industry, so we are proud people, but that pride is not arrogance. The Bajan must not be arrogant. It should not be subservient. And we are not subservient to anybody. We are equal to anyone else around the world. And this population must be the population that can speak to social justice, both domestically and abroad. This population must be the population that can use its education system to find global solutions to global challenges, whether that be climate, infrastructure, health. Who better, Mr. President, than a population on the front line of the climate crisis to provide solutions for the climate crisis? So our universities must work hand in hand with our young people to find solutions for fighting the climate crisis. We continue to see innovative ways of climate finance coming from Barbados. The idea of the Bridgetown Initiative, which is a masterpiece of global advocacy for the reform of the International Financial Service, International Financial Infrastructure, We have to now use our ingredients that we've used for the last 58 years in a way, and I always say it, a simple Bajan analogy. For the last 58 years, we've been using our finite resources, which have produced a sweet bread. Our resources and ingredients have not changed, But we must now use those ingredients now to make either a rock cake, a currant slice, and reorder our ingredients. Because why? We're not blessed with large deposits of oil, gold, bauxite, aluminium, large landmass, waterfalls. But what we have, Mr. President, is a population that has access to free education at the point of delivery. And it is this administration who came in 2018 also correcting the wrong of not also when our citizens couldn't go to UE anymore. On top of that, we restored it and allowed for students, if they attain a first class, honors, or upper seconds, to get their masters what? Free at the point of delivery. We are building out the capacity of the country. And this country must now, again, have a global outlook. And I want to challenge every young person, particularly those between the ages of 15 and 18. And parents, I'm speaking to you as well. Everything your child now does has to have almost like a chart. One, how can I get this to do well in Barbados? Whatever it is, football, cricket, netball, you name it. How can I get this to do well in Barbados in the context of business? And the surplus of that success should be exported. So if you are producing golden apple juice and you're very good at it, and you start in Vauxhall, or you start in Sahel, or you start in Rockdando or Western, you must now see yourself as exporting that across the region and the world. It can't only be that the people who manufactured Florida orange juice can export things to Barbados. True. We must get our population into the thinking of being exporters of world-class Barbadian goods and services. Imagine, we have, per capita, we don't only have the best cricketer in the history of the world, but per capita, nobody can touch Barbados. I love me to speak a little bit right here. Nobody can't touch me when it comes to cricket. A fact. But how have we pivoted, in addition to the nostalgia and a few events here and there, how have we repositioned, just like how Brazil, I know Senator King agrees with this one because he's passionate about it. How have we repositioned our population which churns out cricketers? The best cricketers in the world. Barbados is a manufacturer of cricketers. That's the best way I can put it. But how have we converted that into bringing that global track record, proven track record, and our Barbadian brand, and bring the world here to learn cricket? I'm not necessarily in a formal academy you have to stand up and bowl like this. No. Look at Salt, Mr. President, from UK, England. Who came down here and let me bout? Because why? He grew up here, playing at Harrison College. He knows the Bajan style of cricket. He didn't get into any formal cricket. Perhaps in his later years he did. But Barbados was that conduit and space that allowed for him to have that bravado. And it's notwithstanding he's on the wrong side, because I wish he was playing for West Indies. Sir? Bethel? Yeah. Yeah, and Bethel too. Ah, okay. Well, then thank you for the clarification. Yeah, Bethel grew up here. Okay, my correction. But the point is that Bajan bravado allowed for him to now put some licks in us in our backyard. And notwithstanding that the licks were hot there, it is a model that we should be proud of. As I said, I go back to Otis Gibson, I can call names. Barbados. People should be coming here in a facility built to the state-of-the-art quality hotel and pools and training facilities in cricket. I envision a pitch in the middle, and you have resorts and villas around where people can come and rent and go and watch a cricket game and learning the rudiments of West Indian cricket and Bajan cricket. Brands. You have a situation where Elroy Edie, Sergeant's Village, right next to Vauxhall, the primary school, the same Vauxhall primary school, now produces bats. I think it's called Trident, for a number of West Indies and Indian and cricketers from around the professional world, right there in Sergeant's Village. But again, how do we put that to scale and not a one-off? This population, Mr. President, is a population that is bursting with creativity, ingenuity, and resilience. Because let's face it, Barbadians have not had it easy over the last not just 400 years, but coming down narrowly now, over the last, 50, 60 years. The global challenges have presented us with a number of obstacles. But that notwithstanding, irrespective of administrations now, our people have been able to rise above many of those challenges. Things are not perfect, but there's a Bayesian resilience that allows for us to see the challenge and meet it head on. Not always perfect in the delivery, but we must now use our population. It's in our DNA. Irrespective of if you're African, or Indian, or white, Asian, once you are Bayesian born or adopted, this population must now be the population that helps to change the world. And in bringing it home, Mr. President, it's simply to say that when we look at the issue of managed migration, we're going to have a serious discussion, similar to what countries like Canada and a number of them have done, a number in the European Union. Of course, larger populations, but we can scale it down. We're looking at some of the rudiments. Because why? Given the fact and reality that we've admitted our births are below our death rates, we need a growing population for us to, one, maintain and build on the quality of life that we've been accustomed to. We have to now look out, but in a managed way. It is not open your door and come. Equally, it is not, I don't want you out here. No, that is not the Barbadian way. It is a managed, orderly process determined by a set of criteria that is in the interest of Barbadians, short term, medium term, long term, but also in a way that we've been doing for years, being hospitable to people from around the Caribbean, the world. And therefore, as I close on this at this particular time, I want us to use this moment of independence to reflect, to take pause tomorrow as you go about your ordinary business, whether you're going to the parade, whether you're going to the beach, whether you're just staying home, you're reading a book. Ask yourself, how can this population of which you're a part of, and to the diaspora around the world, ask yourself, how can you contribute to not just sending remittances, but to setting up of ideas, setting up companies here, sharing knowledge with students. How can the Barbadian landscape here and abroad, that's the point, help to reimagine what this country can do using our population to transform and to make the necessary change. And with that, Mr. President, I beg that this resolution be now passed.
Thank you very much, Senator Blackman. Speakers? Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. My prayers have been answered, and now I get to contribute to something that should be less contentious, at least from the perspective of the senators on the government side. Mr. President, the issue of the population size of Barbados, as presented in this document, this resolution, or this policy framework, is quite interesting, and it resonates with me because, Mr. President, I believe that, and I know it's a fact, that the economy cannot exist without people. And if you just for a second remove the focus on the migration or the increasing of the population from the report, you would see a significant focus placed on improving the livelihoods of Barbadians. Let us not focus for a minute on increasing the size of the size of the population. And if you had reviewed the document, especially the goals and action plans, you will see that they have touched various areas in our society that will positively impact the lives of Barbados. And I spoke about this in the 2024-25 debate on estimates. And I said then, and I say again, that I believe that if the government took care of its people, the economy would take care of itself. And this today is an example, as I said, if we don't rush to the increasing of the population just yet, if you focused on some of the content that focus on improving the livelihoods of people, education, healthcare, infrastructure, housing, retention of our people here, encouraging our persons who've gone abroad to come back to Barbados. This is what the document in these few pages that I'm focusing on, which is the action plan and the population goals, are dealing with. So I don't intend to get into noise with the government. I joined and commended those that had a hand in preparing the document. But we want to challenge the government to strip away that element of increasing population just for a minute and evaluate what they have put in this document. Because if they are able to implement some of these things, it would actually improve the lives of people that are living here right now today. Mr. President, the report places great emphasis on improving our population size, making it adequate. It places emphasis on ensuring that those who are able to be productive citizens are productive, generally younger people. And it also put some focus on ensuring that those who are unable to be productive economically are taken care of, which is our elderly. Two significant areas. One, how can we make our people more productive? And two, how can we take care of those who have gone over the hill and cannot be as productive as we would want as it relates to the economic outcome that we expect in terms of working, etc., and because of age and different things. And if you focus just for a minute on just a few things here that I want to highlight. Again, I'm not focused yet on the increase in the population size. I'm just focused on, if we zero in on those things that address some of the social issues that we're having, some of the things that Senator Chuck Blackman spoke about, in terms of how do people respond to the notion of increasing population, of childbirth. Cost of living is a real thing. Access to housing, access to quality education. We have good education, but it can be improved. The diversity in our education product. Being able to access food. You know, things that traditionally will become very political. But as I said, this is not a B versus D conversation. This is, we have in our power the ability to treat to a lot of ills, a lot of things in this society today without even, that would improve our economy without even increasing our population. I'm a firm believer of that. Firm believer of that. So, while we're not against the drive to increase the population, I'm just bringing to the attention of the chamber that when you strip away the migration talk, when you strip away the movement of skilled labor from CARICOM, etc., there is significant benefit in what we already have in terms of if we were to implement some of these things in here right off the bat. And if we were to focus on our people more. Because as I said, We have a bank holiday tomorrow. A bank holiday is a blow to the economy, if you look at it that way. And it's a Saturday, right? So it just goes to show that when people stay home and lay down, or rest and go to the beach, or in the case of tomorrow, come to the Independence Parade and their independence celebration in the communities, etc., it does have an impact. It does have an impact in our economy. When on Sundays there's similar activity happening, we are losing space in the economy. So if Barbadians decided to have every day like a Sunday, we would be in a state of disarray as relates to having economic value. So I'm just trying to say that the people are a very important component of the economy. And we must respect that, and we must treat to that, even in the absence or even in this discussion of recognizing that there is a limitation as relates to our population size. But if you do recognize that there is, that how we treat our people is important, I think it's important then, Mr. President, that we pay careful attention how we treat to our current resources at our disposal. Mr. President, the governments are charged with executing social programs on behalf of the people. They're charged of making sure that we have adequate health care, education, access to housing, access to social services. So how we treat to our current resources, how a government treat to its financial resources is important. And there's no sound person that will tell you you can just expand without managing what you have. Because if you don't manage what you have, you're not even going to grow, because you're not going to get the sweets off of the growth of the population increase. And again, this is across governments. This is not the current government or the Democratic Party government. This is governments in general. And Senator Rogers made interesting points in his discourse earlier on the housing resolution, in that there is a lot of value in making sure that as a government in totality, that we do the right things on behalf of the people of the country. But I'm saying here, Mr. President, that we have to do two things. We have to treat to our people. We have to care for our people. We have to provide for them. We must not neglect what we have in search of what we do not. Because as young people say, you don't know where you're going to find. You know where you got, but you don't know where you get. And it's as much as that, Mr. President, you also have to treat then, have to manage your resources. Have to manage your resources. And Senator Blackman, he referenced the National Insurance Security Scheme just a few times as well. Again, speaking to the need to be able to support our elderly persons in terms of pension, etc. And as governments, again, Mr. President, we cannot believe that, we cannot absent ourselves or our policy decisions for some of the happenings in the institutions across that service Barbados. And over the years, across governments, again, you've had the misuse of funds of our hard workers. And in the recent time, we've had that restructuring that we've seen has impacted some of the monies that will be there or will not be there now for persons that are coming to age that will want to have access to these. And then we are seeing the need now to have to replenish by bringing in workers, replenish the National Insurance Scheme as well, by bringing in workers who more than likely should be paid into the scheme to keep the scheme going. So Mr. President, my point there is that we must care for our resources, manage our resources, but we must also take accountability for the actions that we take, because they do have a consequence, Mr. President. They do have a consequence. We heard it back and forth about the different policy programs in terms of housing, which government spent X, which government took long, which government delivered X houses versus Y houses. But these all have a financial implication to the monies that are entrusted to governments in general. So when we talk about a national population policy, when we talk about growing the population size, we must first recognize what we have and treat to it. Mr. President, I think that the government does have a plan in their heads on how they think that they will treat to this. I think this was the first step in terms of getting organizations together to assist to put a policy in place. But I think they have a plan, and I think that they should be brave enough to share the full plan with Barbados. And I say that from the perspective that we've seen and we've heard about our global profile in terms of what the government is doing globally in terms of raising its profile on different issues. We've also seen the expansion of consulates across the globe. Persons might not recognize, but I also acknowledge that I think we moved from about 15 consulates to about 24 since this government came into office. And that in itself is costing the government about $20 million a year. So there seems to be a concerted effort and a program in place by this government to attract people to Barbados in some form or fashion. And this seems now, Mr. President, to be the start of that in terms of putting it into action. This is just my opinion from observation, Mr. President. So I think that they owe it to us, Mr. President, to just don't get us by surprise. Just be open and transparent. And this position of having debates in the lower house, in the other place, and in here, Mr. President, we need to go beyond that to share the results of this policy. It is public, yes, we know that. But I'm saying to you that effort has to be made to reach as much people as possible to get the buy-in of the people of the country. Because when we start to turn to the migration or the managed migration side of it, that is where the likely kickback will be. That is where persons get concerned. Because that is where persons say, well, we don't have enough money for this. The government already can't do this properly. Look at the state of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Look at the number of persons at the National Housing Corporation. Look at the state of our roads. These are just normal general conversations from government to government. And these are concerns that come up over time when there is talk about importing persons or inviting persons to come to Barbados to reside, to work, whatever. I believe that although the goal was not specific, and I could be corrected here, I think we're looking at a target of around 400,000 persons as a population size in 25 years. It is a significant increase. It is very aggressive, but it's a significant increase. And when we start to speak about those numbers, thousands of persons, it changes the complexion of our society. And persons, rightfully so, will become concerned. So all I'm saying is that we don't let's sit in our chambers, don't let's sit in our parties and have these discourses with special groups and all that, but let us take some information and get a national buy-in. Because this is significant in what it is asking as it relates to increasing our population size. if we treat our people well, we can get a jump start, because some persons might see the opportunity for them to increase their own size of their family. And we spoke about this. I see some of it is in the policy, and I spoke about it in the estimates debate as it relates to family-friendly policies, in terms of economic policies, family-friendly policies, in terms of encouraging persons, or acknowledging that persons are contributing to the population size. So we should not, in isolation, be satisfied that there is a policy, that there is some level of goal set, but I think we have to move to a point where there is more national discourse specific to the consequences of the migration and the implications of migration in such numbers. What does it do to the diversity of our population? These are questions that people would ask. Will it impact our social norms? In other territories in the Caribbean, there are so much different holidays for different groups of persons. There's so much different things that you have to do as a society in terms of providing them to eat. And one of those examples is, for example, halal. In terms of the ethnic, a certain specific group using only halal foods. But these are things that are under consideration when you are seeking to bring in more persons into your population. Yeah, but the magnitude, Mr. President, of is what I'm talking about. It's just an example. It's not a fight. It's just an example of some of the changes and cultural changes that Barbadians will have to go through if we are to be successful in attracting thousands of people to our country to live, to work.
You're correct.
So I think these are things that the government needs to walk Bajans through, conversations that need to be had. Mr. President, Mr. President, I am trying my best to stay focused on the debate.
Don't be distracted. What you were saying is
You're doing very well so far.
Thank you,
Keep focused.
I'm keeping up with you.
But Mr. President, the discussion on the increasing population now specifically is, and I think the government always paints this picture that a set of persons are always against persons coming into the country and etc. There has to be an opportunity for persons to ask questions and to raise issues that will have consequences to the whole notion of migration. It has to be, right? It has to be that persons feel a sense of satisfaction that this thing is real and this thing is hitting home and we understand. So to say, oh, we are going to grow the economy if we increase our population. We're going to grow our economy, but we are also going to grow the demand on the services that we provide for our population as well. So, how do we treat, not only to benefit from the growth of the economy, but how do we treat to the increase on the delivery of our services that we already struggle with? A case in point, Mr. President, is that we already cannot afford, as a government and successive governments, to raise enough money to do the kind of work that we want to do on an annual basis in the country. So we increase the population, and will we raise the money? We are not sure, at least in the short term. But will we increase the burden on the state in terms of providing social services, providing education, providing food, providing health care, and so forth? These are things that have to be carved out because you are going to increase a demand on the social services and on the purse of the government. So, for those who believe that it is just a walk in the park, I say there are some critical questions that need to be asked and some critical issues that need to be addressed. And to go back to my opening, I believe that if the government took great care of its people, the economy will take care of itself. You will always need the people. The people are the economy. That is the point I'm making. And I'm saying that let us focus as governments, not only on the numbers in terms of the numbers that we might need, but let us focus on how we can strengthen what we have. The government often speaks about the National Training Initiative and repurposing training in terms of getting new skills, etc., for our young people. Let us hear how that has positively impacted our society. How has that translated into new jobs, into new skill sets, into filling voids that are being created? Do we know what we need to, where we need to fill gaps? Has there been a report to accompany this population size report that says these are the areas where we need support as a country? We often hear only about construction, primarily in terms of skilled labor and so forth. But these things have to be clear, because if we're going to ask persons to come, we have to know, one, what they're going to do when they get here, two, how they're going to live, and three, the impact it's going to have on our society, socially and economically and financially. So while there's no dispute as to the concept of increasing our population, and while we accept that a lot has to be done because, I mean, we really should be encouraging our people to get more children. We really should be trying to carry on our legacies. Just now you said, Senator Blackman. So, Mr. President, all I'm saying is that a lot of work has to go into and treat to our current state of affairs. That is my overarching point. How we treat our people, and how do we treat to the finances of the government in terms of how we manage those. Because you would know that whenever any government needs to get funds to do carry its mandate, it has to come to the people. It has to come to people either to collect more taxes directly or to ask them to repay a loan. So we have to look at that. And there's some issues that we need to fix even before we go on the thrust of invitation, in my opinion, Mr. President, underemployment. Underemployment. I don't see a lot of action plan around employment and labor law within this document. But that is a great area of opportunity. Employment framework, flexible time, how we treat to minimum hours and minimum pay, Mr. President. Because if we have to satisfy our persons, our citizens are not any different than citizens in other countries, you know. They want fair wages, they want to be able to pay their way, they don't want to have to rely on the state, they want to be able to earn for themselves and make their own financial decisions. So what we do here for our people will help those who come. It will actually be more attractive once we fix some of the issues that we have for others to come to Barbados, to make that decision to come to Barbados. Because if we make where we are a place that Barbados want to be and is envied by all, then is when you get people wanting to come and participate. But not if you just cater over the fact that there's so much great opportunity in this country to invite persons to come to Barbados because you want to reach a certain number, because you think that will grow your economy and that will give you growth. And that will bring more investment. Mr. President, I want to just circle back to the whole conversation about the National Insurance and Social Security. This, Mr. President, this entity is a very important entity. This is where workers sacrifice and their funds are allocated. This is where this service, this national insurance, is not short in practicality of funds in terms of contributions. It is not a beggar. It is actually a provider. It has been a provider of the government from the way of purchasing government securities so that the government can have cash to do what it wants. So it becomes a provider for you as an employee when you are sick, when you are bearing child, when you are injured, and when you have retired, or when you are unemployed for a period of time. It carries a lot of significance for the working of this country. The majority of persons that work rely on this National Insurance and Social Security Service. So we need to treat to it by not just only looking at what it gets, but how it contributes to the common good of the country. I am not convinced, Mr. President, that enough has been done to protect these precious resources that goes into this national insurance from governments in general. That is something that we need to look into in terms of protecting the livelihoods of our workers. I am not ashamed to tell the chamber, Mr. President, that my mother is coming to retirement age very soon and has been extended because of obviously some challenges that we've had based on policy decisions by governments. And she would like, after working for 50 years, to go home and rest herself. And this is the story of a lot of our workers at that age who have been born in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, who, not like me, started to work at 18 and 19, or some of us now starting to work at 24 after studying. These persons are working for 16 and 17 years old. But it's significant hours, years, half a century. So we have to protect the funds. We have to protect the funds. And again, I said it did stand to have political shots on the other side, but I think just a couple of days in the media, there was a story about the impact of the debt restructuring on national insurance. And it is significant. It is significant. So we could talk about all of the recapitalization of this fund, all of the recapitalization of the National Insurance Fund by getting new workers, etc. But we're not managing our finances as a government. It will all result to zero. You just got more money now to do what? Public out away. More hard-earned workers' money at your disposal to mismanage. So, Mr. President, while I agree that, or while we do not share any objections to the policy that's being tabled here, those are just my basic overarching thoughts. And I want to again urge the government, someone in the government, to take this policy, take out everything that relates to migration, and focus on everything that remains. And they will see that if they were to focus on implementing those initiatives on the people that are currently here, currently working, currently looking for a house, currently seeking better health care, currently seeking better infrastructure, currently looking for a reduced cost of living, that it will all go well for the society. And you will start to see a change in the behavior. The economy will grow, children will appear, Mr. President. They will. I guarantee you, Mr. President, that persons who are shying away from the activity, we can't be just wasting money. We can't have overruns here, overruns there. We can't be collecting more taxes and people not seeing the benefits. Mr. President, we are collecting, I think, about $75 to $85 million a year from the same national insurance scheme, through the same national insurance scheme, and giving it to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Mr. President. But what can persons that go there feel? What difference can they feel? Hardly any difference. Hardly any difference. Mr. President, as I wrap up, I think these are two significant areas of opportunity for the government, for any government, to focus on. If we take care of our people, the economy will take care of itself. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of this sitting of the House for 10 minutes. We will reconvene at 6:20 p.m. That's a little extra.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 6:20 p.m. today. Will those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. This sitting is suspended until 6:20 p.m. today.